What if I shared with you that long before the great deluge, heavenly beings came down to our world and twisted everything that had been created? That these angels who fell didn't simply turn their backs on God, but went further, actively sharing with humanity forbidden wisdom we were never supposed to possess. The account you're going to hear isn't merely old legends. It's the missing fragment that makes sense of why our planet became so corrupt that God needed to wash it away with floodwaters. Right now, we're going to explore the full chronology of these fallen angels, starting with their initial uprising, moving through the giants they brought into existence, the mysteries they unveiled, and the universal reckoning that came afterward. When this video ends, you'll grasp why this account was viewed as so threatening that many attempted to wipe it from history completely. Before we jump in, if this channel is new to you, think about hitting that like button and subscribing if you haven't done so yet. Your support allows us to keep delivering these kinds of videos to help you discover something new or just relax. Also, share with us your location and the current time where you are. More than 30,000 people have become part of this community, where you can meet and interact with others who think like you from all corners of the globe in the comments below. So, with no more delay, shall we begin? The Watchers make their descent. High above the clouds, in places where human vision has never reached, there once existed beings made of pure radiance. These were known as the Watchers. Their shapes glowed with heavenly brilliance, their wings stretching across distances that would make mountains look small. For ages beyond measure, they functioned as guardians over creation, watching the movement of celestial bodies and the gradual rotation of planets. Mount Hermon stands like a resting titan in the old landscape. Its summit cuts through the sky, covered in snow and timeless. Right here, where ground touches heaven, the unthinkable took place. The divine made contact with the earthly world in ways that would permanently alter both. The descent didn't start with thunder or tremors, but with quietness, a deep silence that appeared to absorb all sound. Then light appeared, not the soft brightness of morning, but something intense and not of this world. Streaks of radiance cut through the sky, each one representing a fallen guardian dropping toward our planet. 200 angels made this choice. 200 beings who had once stood before the Almighty, now falling like stars ripped from their heavenly positions. Their wings, previously tools of flawless flight, turned into weights, pulling them downward. The atmosphere around them crackled and ignited as heavenly essence collided with earthly air. Mount Hermon shook, not just from their landing, but from the significance of this event. The carefully kept barrier separating heaven and earth had been violated. This was more than simple defiance. This marked a fundamental disruption in the structure of creation. The Watchers had shifted from observers to active players. Every falling angel brought with them understanding that existed only in the highest heavens. Mysteries of creation, the concealed mechanisms of reality, the authentic names holding power. All this divine wisdom now descended toward a planet unprepared for such disclosures. The ground itself appeared to detect the coming tempest. When they made contact with Hermon's slopes, the angels' shapes started to transform. The pure radiance of their celestial bodies grew dim, assuming substance and heaviness. They experienced the force of gravity for the first time, felt the odd sensation of air entering newly shaped lungs. Mortality started seeping into their everlasting nature, like liquid soaking through fabric. The mountain turned into their meeting spot, their new residence between dimensions. Here they would make decisions that would echo across thousands of years. Here they would create connections that heaven never meant to exist. The Watchers had descended, though they hadn't yet completely fallen. That darker change still waited ahead. Down in the valleys, early humankind continued their uncomplicated lives, unaware that everything was about to shift. They couldn't know that the glowing lights they caught sight of on the mountain summit would soon deliver to them presence beyond imagination and results beyond calculation. The stage had been prepared for the most significant rebellion in all creation's story. Prior to the fall, the heavens and their structure. At the very beginning, before time carried weight or space had limits, there was flawless order. Heaven extended beyond what mortals could comprehend, populated with beings made of light and intention. Every angel held their positions, their function, their holy responsibility in the magnificent design of creation. At the supreme throne resided the source of all radiance. Surrounding this divine presence moved the seraphim, beings of absolute worship whose entire being was melody and adoration. Their 6 wings wrapped them in humility, their sounds producing harmonies that established the bedrock of reality itself. Further out stood the cherubim, protectors of divine secrets, their shapes both magnificent and frightening to witness. The archangels delivered divine purpose throughout the universe. Michael the fighter carried a blade that could split dimensions. Gabriel delivered announcements that could transform worlds. Raphael brought restoration that could repair the actual fabric of being. Each served with complete dedication, their strength equaled only by their compliance. Beneath these powerful beings lived innumerable ranks of angels, each possessing their distinct talents and roles. Some cared for the stars, others directed the winds. Still more watched over the fragile equilibrium of living things. Everyone served in unison, their separate desires flawlessly matched with divine purpose. Within these celestial ranks were the Watchers. Their function demanded they watch without meddling, to see without taking part. They looked upon creation from their heavenly stations, documenting the slow movement of planets and the progressive emergence of life. Theirs was a responsibility of complete patience, everlasting watchfulness without involvement. These watchers held understanding that other angels weren't given. They grasped the hidden operations of creation, the concealed designs that controlled reality. They understood how physical matter responded to spirit, how ideas could turn into substance, how divine strength could alter the material world. This understanding was simultaneously their blessing and their weight. The structure was more than simple arrangement. It stood for the flawless movement of divine purpose through creation. Every level accepted instruction from higher up and shared comprehension downward. The connection stayed uninterrupted, the structure preserved, the equilibrium kept. Heaven operated like an enormous instrument, every being contributing their role in an everlasting symphony. Still within this flawless structure, something began to stir. The Watchers, blessed with observation and burdened with comprehension, started viewing creation in a new way. Their continuous vigil over the lower dimensions awakened something that had never previously existed in heaven, inquisitiveness about what existed outside their designated functions. They observed as humans took their initial steps, uttered their initial words, established their initial connections of love and society. The angels watched these creatures made of earth and clay, finding the gift of decision, the ability to determine their own paths within the limits established by divine principle. Gradually, almost without notice, the Watchers started wondering what it might be like to decide rather than merely comply. The structure that had previously felt like sanctuary started to feel like confinement. The functions that had previously provided meaning started to appear like restrictions. The flawless order that had maintained heaven for ages started to display the initial hairline fractures that would ultimately divide creation itself. Heaven stayed the same, but within the hearts of certain angels, the beginnings of rebellion had taken root. The fall hadn't yet started, but its darkness was already extending far across the celestial domain. The world prior to the flood, humanity's time of wonder. Before the waters climbed, before the reckoning descended, the earth experienced a period of marvel. The world extended green and fruitful, unmarked by wasteland or barren ground. Rivers moved with crystal purity, their routes mild and steady. The weather held a perfection that required no changing seasons. Endless springtime blessed every part of creation. Humankind walked in purity during these beginning days. Their lives progressed without the never-ending struggle that would afterward characterize mortal life. Food flourished richly with minimal labor. Animals came near without dread, their natural behaviors still matching with the peaceful purposes of their creation. Death remained far off, aging slow, suffering uncommon. The earliest generations lived for hundreds of years, their bodies robust and their intellects keen beyond what subsequent ages could picture. They recalled their beginnings with precision, handed down accounts of divine creation across numerous generations, without the distortion that time typically produces. Their bond with the sacred stayed direct and intimate. These ancient humans had capabilities that would appear miraculous to current eyes. Their grasp of natural principle went deeper than simple watching. They could detect the concealed designs that controlled growth and restoration, interact with animals in manners that went beyond verbal language, and exist in balance with powers that subsequent generations would dread or worship from distance. Family connections extended across hundreds of years. Great ancestors knew their offspring 20 generations down the line. Understanding gathered across lifespans that approached nearly 1,000 years. Every person functioned as a living archive holding within their recollection the complete story of their people from the absolute start. Still, with all their blessings, these ancient humans stayed innocent of particular kinds of understanding. They knew nothing about combat or aggression, possessing no reason to injure each other for materials or land. The earth supplied everything they needed, and their population stayed controllable, distributed across enormous territories with space for everyone. They had never witnessed the crafting of metal arms or sampled the harsh plants that could bring death. The techniques of deception and trickery stayed foreign to them. Their feelings flowed pure and straightforward. Frustration without malice, grief without hopelessness, happiness without the dread of its conclusion. During nighttime, they assembled to exchange accounts and melodies, their sounds lifting in harmonies that appeared to make the stars glow more intensely. They existed in groups, but without the intricate hierarchies that would afterward separate their offspring. Authority arose naturally from understanding and practice, not from strength or craftiness. Their bond with the divine stayed uncomplicated and straightforward. They communicated with heaven as youngsters communicate with caring parents, without dread, without ceremony, without the complex rituals that subsequent generations would create to span the increasing gap between earth and sky. Prayer moved like breathing, instinctive and ongoing. The ground itself responded to their existence with abundance. Plants developed bigger and more flavorful where human hands cared for them. Water sources ran purer where human footsteps walked their edges. The actual soil appeared to acknowledge and embrace these children of creation. However, innocence, regardless of how lovely, stays delicate. The world that humankind had experienced since their start was about to face powers beyond their grasp. Overhead, the watchers looked down with increasing captivation, getting ready to bring understanding that would change paradise into something far more intricate and far more perilous. The time of wonder stood at its summit, not knowing that its conclusion was coming down from the heavens on wings made of light and darkness. The agreement on Mount Hermon. The peak of Mount Hermon had turned into an assembly location unlike any in creation's record. 200 angels stood forming a circle under stars that had observed the beginning of worlds. The mountain itself appeared to stop breathing, detecting the heaviness of the choice being made on its hillsides. Samjaza stood at the circle's middle, his shape still glowing with heavenly light, yet somehow darkened by the seriousness of this instant. As their selected commander, he carried the accountability for what was going to happen. The other angels gazed at him with combinations of expectation, dread, and intense resolve. We have observed for ages beyond measurement. Samjaza's sound traveled across the quiet summit. We have watched while staying separate. We have seen beauty and amazement while prohibited from taking part. His statements fell like rocks into calm water, every one producing waves that expanded through the gathered host. The agreement they considered was more than defiance. It stood for a basic decision to give up their character as everlasting beings for something unknown and risky. They would exchange immortality for participation, divine separation for mortal involvement. The cost was banishment from heaven. The payment was liberty to select their own direction. Every angel voiced their authentic name as they entered the covenant. Old syllables holding strength resonated across Hermon's summits, connecting them together in mutual intention and mutual fate. These names would afterward be written down by human recorders as a list of the fallen. However, in this instant, they stood for hope. Hope for something past the functions that had characterized them since creation's beginning. The promise they made was awful in its straightforwardness. They would come down to move among humankind. They would distribute their divine understanding with mortal intellects. They would choose wives from within the daughters of humans and produce children that would connect the space between heaven and earth. As a group, they would confront whatever results their decisions might produce. However, underneath these voiced promises lay deeper reasons that every angel held in quietness. Some were pushed by isolation. Ages of observing without friendship had eroded at their hearts, like water eroding stone. Others experienced curiosity burning inside them like a flame that could no longer be held back. Still more were influenced by what they named love, though none could determine if what they experienced for humankind was genuinely that holy feeling. Azazel spoke about the presents he would deliver, the mysteries of metalwork and arms that would push human society forward by thousands of years. Penemu gave his word to instruct writing, the technique of capturing ideas in symbols that could outlive memory. Kazde would disclose the concealed movements of the stars and planets, opening celestial secrets. As every angel announced their planned contribution, the scale of their decision turned clear. They weren't just leaving heaven. They were getting ready to change Earth into something it was never supposed to turn into. The understanding they held would speed up human progress at a rate that might break the delicate equilibrium of creation. The agreement was confirmed not with marks or ceremonies, but with a collective action of intention that vibrated through both heaven and earth. The instant their understanding turned complete, something altered in the universal structure. The deliberately kept division between divine and mortal started to become unclear. Overhead, the stars appeared to flicker with doubt. Underneath, the ground shook with expectation. The watchers had turned into something different, neither completely angelic nor yet mortal, but something in the middle. They had selected change over steadiness, participation over safety, love over responsibility. The covenant of Mount Hermon would resonate through history as the instant when immortal beings decided to turn mortal, when watchers turned into participants, when the established structure of creation encountered its first major challenge from inside. Their coming down into the world of humankind was no longer just bodily. It had turned spiritual, feeling-based, and permanent. The prohibited joining, daughters of humans. Down in the valleys underneath Mount Hermon, human communities spotted the terrain like blossoms in an enormous garden. Here existed the daughters of humans, women possessing beauty and elegance, who had grabbed the focus of beings whose vision had previously looked only upon heavenly marvels. What started as watching from celestial heights had turned into something more profound, more intimate, more risky. The angels moved among humankind for the initial time, their divine shapes deliberately hidden in flesh that could seem mortal. Still, something regarding them stayed unmistakably not of this world. They moved with an elegance that appeared to resist the force of earth. Their sounds held harmonies that mortal voices could not create. Their vision carried depths that communicated understanding beyond human grasp. Women felt pulled to them as blossoms turned facing the sun. These beings presented something that human males could not. A love that held the power of heaven itself. An awareness that seemed like divine favor. Safety that appeared complete and everlasting. The daughters of humans discovered themselves caught up in romances that went beyond anything their kind had experienced previously. Initially, the joining appeared like fairy tales becoming actual. The angels treated their selected women with presence beyond picture. They communicated about far-off worlds and performed melodies that made the heart lift with desire for locations it had never witnessed. They distributed visions of beauty that lived beyond the material world. Love that went beyond the limits of mortal grasp. Every relationship turned into a connection between dimensions that were never supposed to link. When an immortal being decided to love a mortal woman, both experienced change through the meeting. The angels found feelings they had never known: envy, ownership, the dread of losing something that comes with loving something breakable. The women discovered themselves raised beyond their natural condition, touched by strength that changed them on levels they could not grasp. The prohibited character of these joinings only strengthened their intensity. Heaven had not approved these relationships. Divine principle had been transparent regarding the division that must be kept between heavenly and earthly beings. Still love, or what the angels thought to be love, had shown itself more powerful than universal structure. As the relationships grew deeper, the angels started to distribute more than fondness. They disclosed mysteries that had been concealed since creation's beginning. They instructed their wives the authentic names of stars, the concealed characteristics of rocks and plants, the terms of strength that could affect reality itself. Understanding moved from divine intellects to mortal hearts like wine from a spilling cup. The women turned into more than human through these disclosures. Their grasp grew beyond natural boundaries. They could perceive farther, reason more sharply, affect their environment in manners that appeared miraculous to their neighbors. Still, with broadened awareness arrived the awful heaviness of understanding that mortal intellects were not created to hold. Communities started to shift around these changed women. The uncomplicated rhythms of ancient human life turned complicated by fresh longings, fresh possibilities, fresh temptations. The daughters of humans discovered themselves trapped between two dimensions, no longer completely human, however not yet divine. Their actual being turned into a challenge to the natural structure. The angels, in the meantime, found that love was more intricate than the flawless feelings they had experienced in heaven. Mortal hearts delivered mortal complications. Their selected women grew older, even if gradually. They could experience hurt, could experience pain, could be taken away. For beings used to certainty and stability, the breakable quality of mortal love turned into both blessing and burden. Still, from these impossible joinings, something different was starting to move. Life was taking shape that would hold the blood of both heaven and earth. The women who had grabbed angels' hearts now held inside them the beginnings of a different kind of being. Children who would receive both mortal flesh and divine nature. The prohibited had turned into actuality. The impossible was assuming shape in human bodies. The daughters of humans were going to turn into mothers to a race that had never previously lived in all creation's extended story. Beginning of the Nephilim, the birthing rooms resonated with sounds that had never previously been detected on Earth. The sounds of women giving birth combined with something different, a vibration that appeared to arrive from past the material world. The children being delivered held inside them the nature of two worlds, and their actual being sent waves through the structure of reality. The initial Nephilim came out bigger than any human child had ever existed. Their mothers, made stronger by angelic strength, endured births that would have been unthinkable for regular women. Still, even these improved human shapes were pushed to their boundaries by what they delivered into the world. The children of angels required more from their mothers than mortal flesh was created to provide. From their earliest instance, the Nephilim showed capabilities that identified them as different. Their infant vision carried awareness that appeared old, as though they recalled things from prior to their birth. They developed with supernatural quickness, arriving at the size of adult humans while still children in years. Their power went beyond that of mature men, while they looked to be simple youths. However, size was only the most clear of their presence. The Nephilim had intellects that could understand ideas their human families struggled to grasp. They absorbed languages without instruction, gained control of abilities through watching alone, and showed comprehension of natural principles that their father's angelic understanding had made reachable to them. As they grew up, the mixed character of their being turned into both blessing and burden. They could interact with powers that humans could not detect, control matter in manners that appeared miraculous, and reach memories that existed in their heavenly heritage. Still, they stayed connected to bodily shapes that, despite their improvements, were still basically mortal. The Nephilim's hungers matched their size and capabilities. They needed more nourishment than human groups could readily supply, more excitement than uncomplicated human society could present, more tests than the peaceful world of their period held. Their actual existence started to push the materials and social structures of ancient human society. More troubling still were their feeling-based requirements. The Nephilim received their father's ability for powerful feeling, however lacked the divine character that supplied angels with flawless self-discipline. Love turned into fixation, frustration turned into fury. Inquisitiveness turned into drive. They felt human feelings increased by divine power, a mixture that showed risky for both themselves and those surrounding them. Some of the Nephilim displayed exceptional understanding and applied their presence to help human groups. They turned into commanders and instructors, distributing their received understanding in manners that pushed human grasp of healing arts, farming, and natural wisdom. These giants moved among humankind as kind rulers, applying their strength to shield and direct their smaller family. Others, though, discovered different ways to express their mixed character. The mixture of supernatural capability with unlimited hunger directed some Nephilim down bleaker directions. They started to view humans not as family to shield, but as materials to use. Their requirements turned into orders, their longings turned into commands that few could decline. The world started to reform itself around these different beings. Human communities either prospered under the safety of kind Nephilim or experienced pain under the control of those who selected tyranny. The uncomplicated equality that had previously marked human relationships yielded to hierarchies rooted in strength rather than understanding or age. The angelic fathers observed their children with combinations of satisfaction and increasing worry. These children represented their rebellion's achievement, evidence that the limits between heaven and earth could truly be violated. Still, they also disclosed the unexpected results of divine mortal joining. The Nephilim were magnificent. However, they were also risky in manners their makers had not anticipated. The earth itself appeared to react to their existence. The delicate equilibrium that had maintained the world since creation started to alter under the effect of beings who were neither completely natural nor totally divine. The age of purity was concluding, substituted by a period of strength, understanding, and the intricate moral tests that arrived with both. The mysteries of heaven are released. Azazel stood facing an assembly of humans, his hands working metal with unthinkable ability. The ore reacted to his contact as clay reacts to a potter, moving into shapes that mortal intellects had never thought of. What had required heaven's forges ages to make perfect, he now instructed to creatures hardly separated from their creation. The understanding of metalcraft transferred from divine intelligence to human inquisitiveness in a single afternoon. The sounds of pounding soon resonated across valleys that had experienced only the mild rhythms of farming life. Bronze yielded to iron, iron to steel, steel to mixtures whose characteristics appeared to curve the principles of nature. Arms came out from these different forges, blades that could split stone, spears that flew with perfect accuracy, protective covering that turned away hits that would have broken bone. However, metalcraft was only the start. Throughout the old world, other fallen angels opened their voices to distribute mysteries that were never intended for mortal hearing. Penemu assembled scribes surrounding him and disclosed the technique of writing, displaying how ideas could be grabbed in symbols that would outlive memory and death. Human intellects, abruptly able to keep and distribute understanding across generations, started to speed up their progress at rates never seen. Kazde lifted his vision to the night sky and started to identify the stars. Not with the uncomplicated names humans had provided them, but with their authentic celestial identities. He disclosed the concealed movements of planets, the hidden effects that moved from universal bodies to earthly happenings. Star reading was created as humans absorbed how to interpret the heavens like an enormous scroll holding the mysteries of time and destiny. The understanding moved like liquid through a shattered barrier. Barakel instructed the secrets of lightning and climate, displaying humans how to forecast storms and control the strength of the winds. Kokabil disclosed the locations of the stars and their concealed significance, opening human vision to navigation methods that would take them across previously unmapped oceans. Women assembled around angels who distributed different kinds of prohibited understanding. They absorbed the techniques of enhancement, how to improve their natural look with cosmetics created from minerals and plants whose characteristics had been experienced only in heaven. They found dyes that could produce colors more intense than anything nature created naturally. Scents that could awaken feelings with supernatural power. The flood of disclosure changed human society with stunning quickness. Groups that had stayed basically the same for generations abruptly discovered themselves with reach to understanding that transformed every part of their being. Farming pushed forward by thousands of years in simple decades. Building rose past earlier boundaries. Craft and melody arrived at levels of intricacy and beauty that showed their makers contact with heavenly standards. Still, with every mystery disclosed, something basic regarding human character started to shift. The purity that had marked ancient humankind could not endure the gaining of understanding that held moral heaviness. The capability to produce arms unavoidably directed to questions regarding their application. The strength to affect others through cosmetics and mixtures brought up matters of control and trickery. The angels had planned to raise humankind through their presence. However, they found that understanding without insight could turn into a weight rather than a blessing. The humans who accepted divine mysteries discovered themselves able to perform actions their ancestors could never have pictured, actions that were not always helpful to themselves or their groups. Some within humankind started to apply their different capabilities for individual benefit rather than shared good. The understanding of metals made possible the production not just of instruments, but of restraints for holding enemies. The grasp of plants directed not only to healing arts, but to toxic substances that could remove rivals in hiding. The techniques of enhancement turned into instruments for control and domination. The ground itself appeared to fight under the heaviness of hurried progress. Terrains shifted as humans absorbed how to pull metals from deep inside the ground, to change the routes of rivers for their ease, to reform forests and mountains matching their longings. The unity that had previously lived between humankind and nature started to split under the force of applied divine understanding. Heaven observed with increasing concern as the delicate equilibrium of creation tilted toward disorder. The mysteries that had required ages to create in the heavenly world were being pressed into human participation at a rate that risked to overpower the actual foundations of mortal being, the rule of the giants. The Nephilim no longer concealed their character. Throughout the old world, these children of angels and humans climbed to locations of strength that their capabilities made unavoidable. Standing twice the height of regular humans, holding power that could knock down trees and insight received from heavenly intellects, they turned into the rulers of a world not ready for their control. Cities developed around them like blossoms around powerful oaks. The Nephilim didn't just govern. They reformed society, matching their improved grasp and supernatural requirements. Enormous stone structures climbed from the ground, their building needing methods that would not be found again by purely human societies for thousands of years. These were not just buildings, but monuments to mixed ambition. Every giant created domains that showed their separate character and received presence. Some produced centers of absorption where human students assembled to accept filtered forms of angelic understanding. These Nephilim turned into wisdom kings, ruling through shown insight and authentic care for their smaller subjects. Under their direction, human grasp of healing arts, star study, and natural wisdom pushed forward by hundreds of years in single generations. Others pursued different directions. The mixture of supernatural strength with unlimited hunger directed certain Nephilim to perceive humankind not as younger siblings to be shielded, but as materials to be used up. These giants required tribute that pushed human groups to their breaking limit. Their hungers developed past what the ground could naturally supply, pushing innovations in farming and hunting that started to interrupt natural equilibriums. The bleaker parts of Nephilim rule slowly overshadowed the helpful ones. Giants whose received angelic recollections contained understanding of pleasure and feeling started to investigate earthly participation with a power that mortals could not equal. Their festivities turned into legendary for their abundance, their feasts for their plenty, their longings for their intricacy and strength. Some Nephilim found that their improved character made regular human nourishment insufficient for their requirements. They started to use up not just the flesh of animals, but to create hungers that shocked their human family. The boundary between feeding and hunting became unclear, as certain giants discovered that only the most extreme participation could fulfill their mixed character. Their effect expanded through human society like waves from rocks thrown into calm water. Groups competed to assist the most powerful Nephilim, presenting tribute and loyalty in trade for safety. Trade routes created to provide the giants' requirements, transporting exotic nourishments and materials across distances that had earlier appeared unthinkable to cross. Still, the rule of the Nephilim held the beginnings of its own ending. Their improved capabilities arrived with improved requirements, and those requirements developed with every passing generation. What had started as kind rule slowly changed into a system of using that emptied the materials and spirit of purely human groups. The giants started to battle among themselves as their lands grew and their hungers clashed. These were not human battles, but fights between beings whose power could flatten mountains and whose received understanding contained the mysteries of combat absorbed in heaven's most old battles. The ground shook under the force of their fights. Humankind discovered itself trapped between competing Nephilim groups, pushed to select sides in battles they could hardly grasp. The uncomplicated farming groups that had marked pre-deluge society yielded to military-focused societies arranged around assisting and enduring their giant overlords. The natural world started to fight against the shifts forced upon it. Rivers ran crimson, not just with clay, but with the result of supernatural battles. Forests that had existed for thousands of years were removed to supply the giants' building projects. Animals escaped regions where the equilibrium between hunter and hunted had been broken by hungers that nature had never created to fulfill. Some within humankind started to call out against their situation, asking upon the heaven that had produced them to see what the ground had turned into. These sounds climbed like incense, transporting accounts of control and disorder to divine hearing that had been observing with increasing worry. The rule of the giants had changed the world from paradise into something far more intricate and risky. The ground that had previously been a garden was turning into a battlefield, and the pure children of creation were trapped in the center of a battle between strengths they could neither completely grasp nor successfully oppose. The ground calls out. The actual soil appeared to moan under the heaviness of what the world had turned into. Where previously fruitful fields had extended toward far-off horizons, the ground now carried wounds from battles between beings whose power could reform terrains. The earth that had willingly produced crops to mild human hands developed reluctant to maintain groups pushed by the requirements of their supernatural rulers. Rivers that had moved clear and pure for thousands of years started to run in a different way. Some held the crimson mark of battles that had released more than human blood. Others shifted route completely, redirected by Nephilim building projects that assisted the giants' requirements, while interrupting systems that had kept flawless equilibrium since creation's beginning. The animals were the initial to detect the basic wrongness that had come into the world. Creatures that had previously come near humans without dread now escaped at the smell of communities affected by angelic understanding. The natural unity between hunter and hunted, between predator and the pursued, split under the force of hungers that existed in neither earth nor heaven. Old forests started to dry not from sickness or lack of rain, but from something more profound, a spiritual poison that leaked into the actual nature of living things. Trees that had seen the initial sunrise now released their leaves outside of season, their roots fighting to pull feeding from earth that appeared to decline the unnatural effects moving through it. The winds themselves held a different quality, colored with sounds that had never previously lived in the natural world. The unified melodies that birds had performed since creation yielded to rough calls that communicated confusion and pain. Even the insects appeared impacted, their uncomplicated designs of life interrupted by powers they could neither grasp nor adjust to. Human groups discussed of life themselves trapped between the Earth's increasing rebellion and the requirements of their Nephilim overlords. Crops failed not from natural reasons, but from the ground's clear refusal to maintain the systems that had developed up around assisting the giants. Water sources that had never run empty started to fail, pushing migrations that delivered different groups into battle with each other. The most aware within humankind started to have dreams populated with pictures of universal imbalance. They witnessed visions of the ground as a living thing writhing in pain, calling out for relief from weights it was never supposed to hold. These dreamers turned into predictors of fate, cautioning their groups that the present direction directed only to ending. Some humans started to recall accounts from their earliest generations, stories of a period when the world had been in a different way, when the bond between heaven and earth had pursued designs that delivered blessing rather than burden. These recollections awakened desires for a going back to the old ways, though few could picture how such a restoration might be achievable. The corruption was not just bodily, but moral and spiritual. The understanding that the fallen angels had distributed with humankind held ethical meanings that mortal intellects fought to handle. The capability to produce arms directed unavoidably to questions regarding their application. The strength to control natural powers brought up matters regarding the correct bond between produced beings and their surroundings. Children created into this shifted world experienced nothing of the paradise their ancestors had known. To them, the moaning of the ground appeared natural, the battles between giants normal. the using of human labor by supernatural beings, just the manner being worked. Still, even they occasionally experienced stirrings of something in a different way, ancestral recollections that communicated of a superior way. The calls that climbed from the ground were more than figure of speech. They were actual vibrations in the spiritual world, pain signals that held through dimensions past the bodily. The unity that had marked creation since its start was being substituted by conflict that arrived all the way to the throne of heaven itself. In heavenly halls, where flawless structure had ruled since prior to time started, the sounds of earthly suffering could no longer be disregarded. The rebellion of the Watchers had created results that risked not just human society, but the basic steadiness of creation itself. The Earth's calls for fairness and relief had arrived at hearing that held the strength to react. Past the disorder and corruption, past the fights of humankind and the hungers of giants, divine focus started to concentrate on the world with a power that gave promise of shift. The age of unlimited rebellion was pulling to an ending, and the universe itself appeared to stop breathing in expectation of what would arrive next. The reckoning of the Watchers. In the supreme heavens, where time moves in a different way and space curves matching divine purpose, a council assembled that would reform the path of both Earth and the rebellious angels who had turned it their residence. The throne room itself appeared to pulse with an authority that could unmake worlds with a single statement. Still, the reckoning that started to emerge held the deliberate exactness of flawless fairness. Michael, the archangel, stood facing the divine existence, his blade already vibrating with the strength that would be required to execute heaven's command. Next to him, Gabriel got ready to carry announcements that would resonate through both heavenly and earthly worlds. Raphael readied his restoration abilities, understanding that the approaching reckoning would need restoration as much as discipline. The accusations against the Watchers were read in sounds that made the foundations of reality shake. They had left their designated functions, broken the holy limits separating heaven and earth, and brought understanding that had twisted both human purity and natural structure. Their children had turned into tyrants and hunters. Their instructions had directed to aggression and using. Their actual existence had thrown creation outside of equilibrium. Still, the reckoning that pursued held more grief than frustration. These were not simple rebels, but angels who had assisted faithfully for ages prior to their fall. Their wrongdoing was not hatred of goodness, but misguided love. Love that had directed them to decisions that delivered pain, rather than blessing to those they attempted to assist. The punishment was announced with finality that permitted no challenge. The Watchers would be connected in restraints of spiritual blackness, locked in locations past the arrival of light or ease. They would stay conscious of their situation, however powerless to get away from it, able to see the results of their actions, however unable to step in or create amends. Some would be thrown into deep valleys populated with everlasting fire, their immortal nature tormented by fires that ignited without using up. Others would be connected underneath mountains, their power turned against them as they fought forever against connections that developed more powerful with every attempt at getting away. The most rebellious would be pushed into bottomless depths where neither time nor space pursued natural principle. Azazel, who had instructed humankind the techniques of combat, would be thrown into a wasteland location where sharp rocks would cut through his shape for all time. His present of metal craft would turn into his burden as metal tools of pain surrounded him in endless variety. Penemu, who had disclosed the mysteries of writing, would discover himself in a world where terms turned into living things that rotated against their maker. The reckoning extended past the angels themselves to their children and the world they had twisted. The Nephilim, regardless of their combined heritage, could not be allowed to keep their rule over humankind. Their actual being stood for a breaking of natural principle that risked the steadiness of creation itself. Still, their situation would be in a different way from that of their fathers. Being part mortal, the giants could not be locked in the same manner as pure angels. Rather, they would confront a different kind of conclusion, one that respected their human heritage, while recognizing the impossibility of permitting their kept being. The ground itself would be made clean, and in that cleansing the mixed race would discover its ending. However, the divine reckoning held mercy next to fairness. From within humankind, one family would be kept, a line that had stayed pure regardless of the corruption surrounding it. Through this family, the human race would keep going past the approaching disaster, transporting forward the superior of what they had existed while leaving behind the worst of what they had turned into. The agents of reckoning accepted their directions with the same flawless compliance that had always marked heavenly assistance. Michael would connect the rebellious watchers. Gabriel would caution the righteous of what was approaching. Raphael would get ready restoration for the world that would come out from the approaching tempest. Every archangel's function was exactly defined and completely necessary for the restoration of universal structure. As the heavenly court got ready to perform its command, one final element stayed to be handled. Within humankind moved a man whose righteousness had grabbed divine focus, one who might assist as a mediator between the condemned angels and their heavenly judges. This man would transport announcements that no other mortal could hold, see scenes that would shatter regular intellects, and document testimonies that would resonate through the ages. The wheels of divine fairness started to rotate with the unstoppable strength of universal principle. What had been placed in movement by the Watchers' rebellion would now discover its ending in reckoning that restored the correct structure of creation. The age of giants and fallen angels was pulling to its ending. However, not prior to one final chapter would be created by a human scribe selected to document the conclusion of the world as it had existed. Enoch, the scribe of reckoning. Within all humankind, one man moved in a different way. Enoch traveled through the world with intention that others could not understand. While his neighbors cared for flocks and planted seeds, he looked upward. The heavens summoned to him in manners that resisted uncomplicated grasp. The disorder underneath had arrived at a breaking limit. Giants wandered the ground, their hungers without end. The sons of the Watchers used up everything in their direction. Blood soaked the soil. Creation itself moaned under the heaviness of corruption. Something needed to shift. Heaven noticed Enoch's pure heart. More than just another human, he held inside him the capability to connect two dimensions. His feet contacted earth. Still, his spirit could climb past the clouds. The divine world witnessed in him what they required most, a messenger who could communicate to both sides. The summons arrived like thunder wrapped in murmurs. One instant, Enoch existed within his people. The following, he discovered himself raised past mortal grasp. Angels surrounded him, their shapes blazing with radiance that should have ended human vision. Still, he stayed whole, shielded by divine favor. The journey upward disclosed layers of being concealed from earthly perception. 7 heavens extended overhead, every one more magnificent than the previous. Gardens of crystal blossoms bloomed in everlasting spring. Rivers of radiance moved between worlds where time carried no significance. Melody past human grasp populated every space with unity that made the heart weep with happiness. At the throne of the Most Supreme, Enoch accepted his assignment. The Watchers had shattered universal principle. Their children risked to unravel creation itself. Fairness required action. Still mercy still wished for redemption. Enoch would transport the final announcement to the fallen ones. His statements would establish their situation. The scribe of heaven now carried accountability for reckoning itself. Enoch took on this weight, understanding that some truths cut more profoundly than any blade. The fallen angels waited for their punishment, and through him, heaven would communicate its final statement. The visions arrived in waves. Future deluges, igniting cities, nations still unborn. Enoch witnessed the extended arc of story extending ahead like a scroll opening through time. Inside these glimpses existed the results of the Watchers' rebellion, moving through generations like rocks thrown into calm water. When Enoch came down back to earth, he held with him understanding that no mortal was supposed to hold. The heaviness of divine mysteries forced against his human intellect. Still, he persisted for the benefit of those who would arrive after. His book would keep these truths for generations who required to grasp what had been taken away. The fallen Watchers assembled when they heard of Enoch's coming back. Their previously glorious shapes now held the mark of their decisions. Azazel existed within them, his presence of prohibited understanding, having twisted innumerable souls. Samjaza, their commander, carried the most heavy weight of guilt for the promise that had condemned them all. Enoch communicated the statements that heaven had provided him. No relief would arrive. Their discipline would extend across ages until the final reckoning. The bottomless pit waited for them, a prison bleaker than the space separating stars. Their children, the giants, would end in the approaching deluge. Only echoes of their being would stay. The watchers wept when they heard their situation. These beings who had previously performed praises surrounding the divine throne now confronted everlasting division from the radiance they had left. Their tears dropped like igniting rain, every drop holding the heaviness of unlimited loss. Still, Enoch's announcement held more than condemnation. Inside the reckoning existed threads of hope for humankind. The deluge would make clean the ground, however righteous Noah would keep the future. Fresh opportunities would arrive for mortals to select insight over corruption. The account would keep going, even after the giants dropped. Through Enoch's writings, future generations would grasp the cost of violating divine limits. His statements would resonate through hundreds of years, cautioning of the risks that arrive when produced beings arrive past their designated location. The scribe of reckoning had completed his intention, connecting heaven and earth one final time prior to the waters climbed. The great deluge starts. Rain had never dropped like this previously. The initial drop hit the ground with intention past simple climate. Every droplet held inside it the heaviness of divine reckoning. The tears of creation itself calling out for cleansing. The sky opened like an enormous container, releasing waters that had waited since the foundation of the world. Noah existed at the entrance of his great vessel, observing the final animals come in their designated locations. For years he had worked on this unthinkable task. His neighbors had ridiculed his cautions, named him insane for constructing a boat where no ocean lived. Now their laughter ended in their voices as grasp arrived too late. The ark stood for more than endurance. It represented hope in bodily shape. Every plank of gopher wood communicated of divine mercy kept inside reckoning. Every connection sealed with pitch announced that ending would not hold the final statement. Inside its walls, the future of creation waited in trusting quietness. Past the safety of the ark, the world started to break apart. The Nephilim, those powerful giants who had ruled with iron grips, now confronted a strength they could not overcome. Their great cities fell apart as foundations altered underneath climbing waters. Towers constructed to test heaven toppled into the developing ocean. The fountains of the deep exploded forth with primal power. Waters that had rested underneath the earth's outer layer erupted skyward, joining the coming down rain in universal embrace. The actual structure of the world remade itself, cleaning away the corruption that had taken root in every part of creation. Azazel's pupils, those humans who had absorbed prohibited techniques, observed helplessly as their gathered understanding showed worthless. Sorceries could not stop the deluge. Arms forged with angelic mysteries could not slice through the climbing tide. All their stolen insight fell apart, facing the straightforwardness of water, complying with its creator's sound. The giants battled the unavoidable with desperate fury. These beings who had frightened humankind for generations now felt fright themselves. Their enormous frames, once representations of unrivaled dominance, turned into handicaps as the waters grew deeper. The act of swimming demanded a fluid elegance they'd never acquired, a sense of humility their very essence refused to accept. Mountain ranges vanished under the growing sea. Low-lying areas filled up like containers, accepting water without end. The tallest summits, once believed to be as lasting as time itself, transformed into shrinking islands with every hour that went by. The planet itself appeared to breathe out in freedom as the weight of wickedness was lifted from its surface. Inside the ark, an entirely different reality took shape. Creatures that had never occupied the same territory began to settle peacefully next to old adversaries. Great cats rested alongside gentle sheep, not through enchantment, but through necessity that created mutual respect. The floating refuge became a garden of tranquility, safeguarding everything that remained untainted. While disorder consumed the world beyond its walls, Noah's household observed the conclusion of an era through narrow openings positioned high along the ark's structure. They witnessed the final remnants of the antediluvian civilization disappear under the rising tide, a society that had climbed to remarkable intellectual peaks while descending into equally profound moral corruption. The deluge wiped away both triumphs and atrocities with identical thoroughness. The watchers, locked away in their shadowy restraints, experienced the flood rising over their earthly territories. Their corporeal manifestations might have existed beyond the water's grasp, yet their spirits shattered as they observed their mixed-blood offspring dying. Each fallen giant transmitted surges of grief throughout the condemned angel's perpetual suffering. Across 40 days and 40 nights, rainfall pursued its unrelenting mission. The steady pattern evolved into the pulse of a planet experiencing rebirth. Every droplet contributed to the immense cleansing that would reshape the Earth's terrain. The flood submerged the loftiest peaks by 15 cubits, guaranteeing that no trace of the tainted age would remain. After the precipitation finally ceased, quietness descended upon the transformed landscape. The ark drifted in solitude across a boundless sea extending past every visible edge. Under those peaceful waters rested the skeletal remains of giants, the wreckage of magnificent metropolitan areas, the fragments of humanity's initial reach for transcendence. The former world had reached its conclusion, but from these same waters, fresh opportunities would surface. The dove Noah released would shortly come back bearing an olive branch, evidence that the earth itself stood prepared to start over. The flood had fulfilled its intended function, purifying creation while protecting its continuation. Through the ark's opening, Noah glimpsed the earliest signs of tomorrow's promise, emerging from yesterday's reckoning, the Nephilim. Following the flood, the waters withdrew gradually, unveiling a planet washed spotless. Lowlands emerged where they'd never existed previously. Fresh waterways cut virgin channels through untouched earth. The world presented an altered appearance, as though waking from an extended, disturbed slumber into the brightness of morning. Still, under this immaculate exterior, uncertainties persisted like lingering shadows. Noah, alongside his household, placed their feet upon the dried terrain with amazement and caution. Their steps touched ground that judgment itself had washed. Each growing thing, every wandering creature, embodied the potential of righteousness establishing roots in uncorrupted soil. The ark had safeguarded not merely life itself, but the chance for moral purity to flourish in untainted ground. The giants had vanished, or that's how things appeared. Their colossal bodies had died beneath the overwhelming force of heaven's waters. Metropolitan centers, constructed to their dimensions, lay entombed under accumulations of sediment and ages. The Nephilim's oppressive rule had concluded with the flood's closing surge. All of creation could inhale freely once more. However, ancestral lines preserve recollections that reach deeper than any water can penetrate. Within Noah's male descendants and their spouses flowed humanity's intricate inheritance, pure enough to withstand judgment, yet bearing remnants of what had existed before. The genetic reverberations of ancient times wouldn't stay quiet indefinitely. Ham's lineage dispersed across the planet with tireless drive. They constructed urban centers and established kingdoms with aspirations that felt strangely recognizable to anyone remembering the previous world. Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan, names destined to resonate throughout time, carrying within themselves both potential and danger. Within the territory that would eventually carry Canaan's designation, something began to stir. The very ground appeared to retain memories of what lay buried under the deluge. New giants started appearing, not the massive Nephilim of earlier times, but their far-removed relatives. The Anakim walked the planet again, their exceptional height marking them as descendants of a forgotten period. These giants who emerged after the flood carried themselves in ways that differed from their forebears. The raw ferocity of the antediluvian Nephilim had been moderated through generations of dilution. Still, their existence spoke to mysteries the flood hadn't completely eliminated. They existed as living puzzles regarding the character of both corruption and salvation. Og of Bashan surfaced from early history's obscurity like a moving mountain among foothills. His iron bed extended 13 feet in length, a testament to proportions that defied typical human dimensions. The ruler of Bashan governed with the confidence of someone who recalled when giants controlled the earth without opposition. The Rephaim occupied the borderlands, separating mythology from documented events. Their designation hinted at the departed, the phantoms, the vestiges of what once possessed terrible might. They inhabited the edges of human communities, neither completely part of this reality nor totally separated from it. Their continued existence raised troubling questions about how permanent divine judgment truly was. Goliath would eventually step into scriptural accounts, bearing weaponry created for hands exceeding normal human size. His confrontation with Israel mirrored ancient struggles when giants and humans competed for authority over the planet. Within his arrogance lived the recollection of Nephilim conceit, though weakened by centuries of evolving bloodlines. The Emim, the Zuzim, the Zamzamim, these designations appear momentarily in historical records like air pockets ascending from great depths. Every group bore the hereditary markers of remarkable stature combined with human drive. They erected cities and conducted warfare with the passion of those who remembered more magnificent eras. Certain students of ancient learning propose that the giants' reappearance required no supernatural interference. The Watchers' transgression had introduced modifications into human heredity that remained dormant, awaiting appropriate circumstances to manifest themselves. The flood purified the planet, but couldn't erase what had already merged with humanity's fundamental character. Different scholars suggested that additional Watchers came down following the flood, duplicating their forerunners' errors on a reduced scale. These subsequent angels, observing the repopulated Earth, couldn't withstand the urge to meddle once again. Their relationships with mortal women created giants less enormous than previously, yet still distinguished by their otherworldly ancestry. The appearance of giants after the flood disturbed those attempting to comprehend heavenly justice. If the deluge had genuinely cleansed the planet of Nephilim contamination, how could their progeny walk among Noah's descendants? The explanation remained concealed in the intricate relationship connecting judgment and compassion between heavenly action and natural outcome. Israel would face these surviving giants across their campaign for the promised territory. Every confrontation with the Anakim became a battle against reverberations of humanity's original defiance. Triumph over Goliath signified more than battlefield success. It represented the continuing struggle between heavenly structure and disorderly ambition. The giants' continuation following the flood functioned as proof that certain outcomes outlive their origins. The Watchers' rebellion had introduced components into existence that couldn't be simply washed away. Rather, they demanded continuous alertness, repeated decisions, and the steady efforts of generations dedicated to righteousness instead of dominance. The Book of Giants, Lost Chronicles. Far within the Qumran caves, ancient manuscripts waited in patient stillness, resting wrapped in obscurity for 2,000 years. They contained mysteries that questioned everything academics believed they understood about the antediluvian era. When the initial pieces surfaced into contemporary awareness, they communicated in voices that had remained quiet since before the floodwaters climbed. The Book of Giants revealed itself like a preserved nightmare on parchment. Its writers had observed the closing days of the Nephilim directly, documenting their statements and behaviors with the meticulous accuracy of those who comprehended. They were chronicling the conclusion of an epoch. These weren't legends shared around fires, but evidence from history's depths. Ohia and Haya, descendants of the fallen angel Shemi-Haza, controlled the account with their oversized presence. These giants possessed not simply physical immensity, but intellects that could understand ideas exceeding ordinary human capacity. Their exchanges unveiled beings trapped between heavenly heritage and worldly contamination, wrestling with understanding that delivered only hopelessness. Visions tormented the giants during their closing days. Sleep, which ought to have provided rest, instead transmitted images of approaching annihilation. Oya observed 7 tablets thrown into water, all except one dissolving into emptiness. The symbolism needed no explanation. The flood would eliminate nearly everything, leaving merely pieces to communicate the account of what had been destroyed. Haya's visions proved even more unsettling. He observed a massive stone blanketing the whole planet while an eagle soared overhead bearing tablets of caution. The giants assembled to hear his vision, their expressions solemn with comprehension. Even beings possessing their strength couldn't evade the judgment that advanced like an unstoppable current. The incomplete character of the remaining text reflects the destruction it portrays. Sentences stop mid-expression, leaving readers to picture the full extent of the giants' final exchanges. Still, within these partial statements lies evidence more compelling than any complete account. The genuine voice of beings confronting their own extinction. Mahaway, another giant of distinction, undertook urgent journeys pursuing intervention from heaven itself. His travels carried him past the limits of the familiar world to locations where the separation between realms grew thin. He pursued Enoch, the human who had journeyed with God, hoping that heavenly compassion might still rescue his people from the approaching disaster. The giants' efforts to grasp their destiny revealed minds grappling with ideas of fairness and outcome. They had existed as deities among common people, claiming what they desired without considering consequences. Now confronted with judgment, they struggled to understand how their behaviors had woven the very instrument of their ruin. Barakel and his brothers received visits from their giant sons who arrived pursuing wisdom their fathers could no longer offer. The fallen angels, confined in obscurity, could provide only remorse for the decisions that had brought them to this point. Their understanding, once so desired by humanity, proved meaningless against the force of heavenly anger. The Book of Giants maintains pieces of genuine exchanges between the Nephilim and their angelic fathers. These conversations unveil the complicated relationship connecting the Watchers and their mixed offspring. Affection and arrogance intermingled with dread, as the fallen angels observed their children facing destruction that their own transgression had made unavoidable. As the deluge drew near, the giants' conduct became progressively frantic. Some tried to construct towers that could extend above the approaching waters. Others attempted to safeguard their understanding in concealed locations, hoping subsequent generations might retrieve their mysteries. Every such attempt proved ineffective against the totality of heavenly judgment. The fragmentary character of the text indicates that even the giants' closing statements weren't intended to remain whole. Still, what persists carries the significance of genuine evidence from beings who connect the space between mythology and documented events. Their voices resonate from beyond the flood, providing witness to realities that influence the very foundations of human society. Visions of annihilation transformed into the actuality of climbing waters. The Book of Giants concludes as it started, in pieces, in obscurity, in the quietness of things permanently lost. Still, its continuation in the Dead Sea caves indicates that certain realities are too significant to stay entombed, too fundamental to human comprehension to vanish entirely beneath time's burden. Contemporary academics dispute the text's connection to more recognized accounts in the Book of Enoch and Genesis. However, the giants' personal statements require no outside confirmation. They communicate with the credibility of those who experienced history's most significant catastrophe, presenting their evidence as both caution and remembrance of the cost that arrives when created beings extend past their designated limits. Fallen angels spanning cultures. The account resonates across every landmass, like waves from a stone cast into the middle of human recollection. Various cultures communicate in different tongues, honor different deities. Yet their legends bear similar themes. Heavenly beings who came down from above, distributed prohibited understanding, and left behind mixed descendants who would disturb the planet. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Apkallu moved among humanity with the demeanor of beings from another dimension. These fish-garbed wise ones brought civilization itself, written language, mathematics, the crafts of construction and conflict. Sumerian inscriptions speak of 7 who arrived before the deluge, their contributions transforming basic tribes into the world's initial great society. Still, their inheritance bore the same uncertainty that characterized the Watchers' interference. The Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh maintains recollections of Enkidu, the wild individual created by the deities to oppose the powerful king. Neither completely mortal nor heavenly, Enkidu represented the hazardous territory between dimensions where the Watchers had existed. His companionship with Gilgamesh reflected the intricate relationship connecting the fallen angels and humanity, close yet ultimately sorrowful. Greek mythology brims with accounts of gods who couldn't resist mortal women. Zeus came down in innumerable forms to father descendants who would alter history. Perseus, Heracles, Helen of Troy, all bore the complicated blessing of heavenly blood coursing through human vessels. The Titans, confined under the planet for their uprising against heaven, anticipated a concluding conflict that would decide the destiny of both gods and people. The Gigantes of Greek tradition possessed the dimensions and rage of the scriptural Nephilim. Created from Gaia's relationship with Uranus's scattered blood, they conducted warfare against Mount Olympus itself. Their defeat demanded heavenly action on a universal magnitude, mirroring the judgment that descended upon the antediluvian era. Even in loss, their inheritance continued in the heroes and creatures that filled subsequent legends. Hindu customs speak of the Asuras, heavenly beings who descended from favor through arrogance and longing. Once comparable to the Devas in strength and magnificence, they selected the route of obscurity and became adversaries of universal structure. Their conflicts with the gods extend across numerous ages, each struggle reflecting the continuous battle between illumination and darkness that started with the initial rebellion in heaven. The Rakshasas of Indian tradition carry the hereditary memory of beings who traversed the divisions between species. These form changers possessed understanding of sorcery and metalwork that they distributed to humans, perpetually for a price that proved higher than anticipated. Their reversed hands identified them as creatures who had inverted the natural sequence through their very being. Celtic mythology maintains the Tuatha De Danann, the heavenly tribe who arrived in Ireland carrying 4 magical treasures. Their appearance from the northern islands reflects the coming down of the Watchers from heaven. They intermarried with mortal women, creating lines of heroes and rulers whose otherworldly capabilities mirrored their heavenly ancestry. The Nephilim of Celtic custom became the Fomorians, ancient giants who controlled Ireland before the arrival of more recognizable gods. Their conflicts with the Tuatha De Danann maintained memories of struggles between varied orders of heavenly beings, each battling for authority over both planet and heaven. Norse mythology relates tales of the Jotnar, giants who held wisdom that even the gods coveted. Still, their understanding arrived with the cost of disorder, their very being threatening the structure that the Aesir attempted to preserve. Ragnarok itself would start when these giants escaped from their restraints, mirroring the apocalyptic cautions discovered in Enoch's visions. The Nephilim surface in Norse custom as the descendants of giants and gods, beings whose combined character made them both mighty and volatile. Loki himself embodied this hazardous mixture, capable of remarkable cleverness and equally remarkable devastation. His confinement under the planet anticipated a concluding release that would initiate the world's conclusion. African customs maintain their personal recollections of heavenly teachers who came down from the heavens. The Dogon people speak of the Nommo, water-dwelling beings who brought understanding of star patterns and farming. Their contributions transformed human society. Still, their leaving left humanity attempting to preserve what they had received without completely grasping its origin. Native American cultures relate tales of star people who united with earth women, creating descendants with capabilities that exceeded ordinary human boundaries. The Hopi speak of the Kachinas, spiritual beings who instructed the crafts of survival and ritual. Their eventual departure signified the conclusion of a period when heaven and earth sustained closer interaction. These corresponding customs indicate that the Watchers' rebellion wasn't a singular occurrence, but portion of a broader design woven into the structure of human experience. Every culture maintains some recollection of the period when heavenly beings moved among mortals, distributing understanding that transformed society while introducing disorder that would resonate through the generations. The widespread nature of these themes indicates experiences too significant to be rejected as simple mythology. Whether grasped literally or figuratively, these accounts maintain realities about the hazardous attraction between varied orders of being, the cost of prohibited understanding, and the outcomes that spread through time when universal boundaries are violated. The Tower of Babel and additional acts of defiance. The planet communicated in one tongue during those days following the flood. Every human voice bore the same rhythm, distributed the same terms for optimism and dread, affection and grief. This oneness ought to have delivered peace. Instead, it created something more hazardous, the unified aspiration to oppose heaven itself. Unity absent wisdom transforms into a weapon turned against its owner. Nimrod surfaced from this single-languaged world like a flame ascending from kindling. His designation signified rebellion, and he carried it with arrogance that mirrored older defiances. The blood of giants coursed in his vessels, weakened by generations, yet still bearing the recollection of beings who had once commanded earth as deities. Within him, the ancient yearning awakened anew. The plain of Shinar extended without end under desert heavens, its ground rich enough to sustain magnificent cities. Here Nimrod assembled the dispersed tribes, communicating words that sparked visions of empire. He guaranteed towers that would scrape heaven's underside, barriers that would hold human destiny within human authority. His vision attracted followers like moths toward flame. Babel ascended brick by brick, each layer climbing higher than the previous. The tower's base demanded stones extracted from far-off mountains. Its binding mixture combined with aspiration that acknowledged no boundaries. Workers sang as they toiled, their shared language permitting coordination that would have been unattainable in later separated times. Still, the tower signified more than construction. It represented humanity's second effort to penetrate the division between mortal and heavenly. The initial rebellion had arrived through the Watchers coming down. Now mortals attempted to invert that journey, ascending upward to claim what they considered rightfully theirs. The bricks themselves bore symbolic significance. Each one represented human hands molding earth into forms that challenged natural principle. Clay became more resilient than stone through fire and determination, just as humans attempted to become more than their created character through unified effort. The very process of construction became a process of transformation. During nighttime, when labor stopped, Nimrod would ascend the incomplete tower to examine his expanding kingdom. From those heights, the world below appeared small and controllable. Cities seemed like playthings, rivers like threads, people like insects moving with intention he could scarcely understand. The viewpoint created arrogance that expanded with each additional layer of stone. Heaven observed this construction with eternity's patience. Still, worry increased with each day that passed. The tower itself presented no danger to heavenly security. No structure erected by mortal hands could extend to the Most High's throne. However, the perspective it signified mirrored hazardous thoughts that had once contaminated angels themselves. The shared language enabled not merely the tower, but the distribution of understanding that ought to have stayed entombed under floodwaters. Pieces of antediluvian wisdom appeared in exchanges transmitted from grandfather to grandchild, like valuable stones. Metalworking, star study, crafts of conflict and peace, all the contributions the Watchers had provided surfaced anew. Babel transformed into more than an urban center. It evolved into an academy of prohibited learning. Academics assembled from across the familiar world, attracted by guarantees of wisdom that surpassed ordinary human comprehension. They attempted to rebuild the complete understanding that the giants had held, believing that such wisdom would raise them past their designated position. The tower's height generated its personal weather designs. Winds circulated around its summit in ways that appeared to distort natural principle. Birds struggled to soar at such heights. Still, the constructors pressed higher, motivated by visions of viewpoints that mortal eyes were never intended to observe. Each additional level brought them nearer to mysteries that heaven had selected to hide. Heavenly action arrived not as deluge or fire, but as bewilderment woven into the very structure of human exchange. Words that had borne clear significance moments earlier became nonsense in unfamiliar mouths. Brothers could no longer communicate to brothers. Workers could no longer synchronize their activities. And the magnificent project ground to a stop in exasperated quietness. The dispersal that occurred distributed more than people across the planet. It scattered the pieces of prohibited understanding that had started to gather in Babel. Each group that traveled to far-off territories bore only portions of what had once threatened to become hazardously complete. The scattering became a compassion concealed as judgment. Still, Nimrod's defiance created a design that would duplicate throughout time. Whenever humans assembled adequate strength and oneness, the urge would surface to oppose heaven once more. Babylon, Egypt, Rome, and innumerable other empires would mirror Babel's aspiration, each believing they could triumph where their forerunners had failed. The remains of the tower persisted as a monument to human aspirations' boundaries. Wind and weather would ultimately claim even its base. Still, its recollection continued in every later effort to construct structures that extended past their creator's natural reach. Babel had collapsed, but the yearning it signified would never be entirely fulfilled. Languages increased across the planet like flowers appearing in various seasons, each bearing pieces of the initial tongue that had once unified all human communication. Within this variety resided both judgment and contribution, the failure to synchronize perfect rebellion, balanced by the magnificence of varied expression that enhanced the human experience past anything uniformity could have offered. Angels in chains, where are they now? Obscurity, deeper than the void between stars, contains the watchers in restraints created from their personal broken promises. No illumination enters their confinement. No sound interrupts their perpetual quietness except the resonance of their personal remorse. Time advances differently in this location. Instants extend like centuries while ages pass like individual breaths. Here the fallen angels anticipate a judgment that stays perpetually far off. The abyss itself challenges human comprehension. Neither completely physical nor entirely spiritual, it exists in the territories between what mortals regard as actual. Ancient texts portray it as a pit without bottom, a confinement without barriers, an obscurity that cannot be gauged by any scale earthly intellects might understand. Within this impossibility, beings who once sang around heaven's throne now exist in complete separation. Azazel bears chains more massive than mountains, created from the weaponry he instructed humanity to craft. Each connection bears the burden of every blade that extracted blood, every spear that claimed life, every arrow that discovered its target in blameless flesh. The metals he unveiled to human smiths transformed into the very material of his confinement, fairness reflecting the character of his transgression. Samyaza, the commander who initially suggested the binding promise on Mount Hermon, hangs suspended between planet and heaven, too fallen to climb, too arrogant to completely come down. His suffering reflects his role as initiator of the magnificent rebellion. Around him hang his supporters, each confined according to their particular violation against heavenly structure. The teaching angels endure torments fashioned from their personal contributions to humanity. Penemu, who unveiled the mysteries of writing, discovers himself encircled by books whose pages ignite without being destroyed, their words rearranging themselves into accusations that sear his awareness. Kazde, who distributed the understanding of conflict, experiences perpetual battles where triumph and loss become meaningless ideas. Barakal, who instructed star study, observes stars that ignite backward, constellations that inscribe his disgrace across a heaven that no other eyes will ever observe. The understanding he distributed to mortals becomes a reflection displaying his personal foolishness. Wisdom transformed into its contrary through the perspective of judgment. These fallen beings maintain their angelic character despite their deterioration. Their intellects still hold the immense intelligence that once fulfilled heaven's intentions. Still, now that capacity becomes another component of their suffering. They grasp perfectly the significance of what they've forfeited, the impossibility of what they discarded for temporary pleasures. Recollection becomes their most severe companion. They remember the magnificence of existing in the heavenly presence, the music of spheres that once filled their being with harmony past description. Those golden instants contrast sharply with their current obscurity. Each beautiful memory transformed into a source of distress that penetrates deeper than any physical pain. Certain customs speak of levels within the abyss, various degrees of suffering matching various degrees of violation. The Watchers, who simply took human spouses, endured differently than those who distributed prohibited understanding. Those who actively contaminated humanity confronted torments more severe than those who participated reluctantly in the magnificent rebellion. Time in the abyss advances according to heavenly will rather than natural principle. A solitary instant of remorse might extend across millennia, while centuries of suffering could pass in what feels like heartbeats. This temporal distortion guarantees that every aspect of their transgression receives complete consideration. Every outcome plays out to its completion. The chains that confine the Watchers were created before their rebellion started. Heavenly foreknowledge prepared their confinement while they still fulfilled faithfully in heaven's courts. Their restraints anticipated in patient obscurity, prepared to receive prisoners who had not yet selected their destiny. Fairness prepared for compassion's rejection. Still, even in their suffering, remnants of their initial magnificence persist. The fallen angels hold beauty that obscurity cannot entirely extinguish, though it becomes terrible in its contaminated form. Their voices, when they communicate at all, still bear resonances of the music they once contributed to heaven's perpetual song. Prophecy indicates their confinement will not continue perpetually. The book of Revelation speaks of a period when the abyss will open, releasing its prisoners for a concluding test of creation's determination. The Watchers' ultimate destiny stays connected to humanity's fate, their account incomplete until the closing chapter of earthly history reveals itself. Certain academics suggest that the fallen angels experienced not merely suffering, but an unusual form of purification. Their torment might function to consume away the contamination that brought about their descent, preparing them for some role in the universal drama yet to be unveiled. Whether this signifies compassion or simply another turn of fairness's wheel stays concealed in heavenly counsel. The position of their confinement surpasses physical geography. It exists wherever the outcomes of rebellion generate separation from heavenly presence. In this manner, the abyss contacts every corner of existence where the effects of the Watchers' decisions continue to reveal themselves. Their chains extend across time and space, confining not merely their bodies, but the very inheritance of their behaviors. Contemporary seekers occasionally claim to contact these confined beings through various mystical practices. Still, such assertions ignore the absolute character of their confinement. The Watchers cannot evade their chains to communicate mysteries to mortal ears, cannot provide shortcuts to strength or understanding. Their confinement stays complete until heaven itself selects to release their restraints. Giants in the Bible, David, Goliath, and more. The morning sun threw extended shadows across the valley of Elah as two armies confronted each other in lethal quietness. Israel's forces trembled on one hillside while Philistine warriors mocked from the other. Between them extended a neutral territory where honor would be tested and legends created. The stage was prepared for a confrontation that would resonate through centuries of human recollection. Goliath surfaced from the Philistine formations like a mountain given human shape. Standing beyond 9 feet in height, his bronze armor captured sunlight and reflected it back in dazzling flashes. The spear in his hand resembled a weaver's beam, its iron tip alone weighing 15 pounds. His voice thundered across the valley with the confidence of one familiar with absolute authority. Across 40 days, the giant had presented his confrontation. Each morning and evening, he advanced into the valley and threw insults at Israel's God and people. His presence alone paralyzed Saul's army with terror that extended past rational dread. This was not simply a large warrior. This was a surviving remnant of the ancient world, a hereditary echo of the Nephilim who had once controlled the planet. The Philistines had nurtured these bloodlines deliberately. In Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, and additional cities, families bearing the indicators of ancient giants preserved their heritage through deliberate marriages and meticulous genealogies. They functioned as living weapons, psychological warfare given human shape. Goliath signified the perfection of their cultivation program. David approached the battlefield with the pure confidence of youth untested by uncertainty. While his brothers observed only an impossible adversary, the shepherd boy observed an opportunity to prove heavenly faithfulness. His faith had been created in solitary pastures where he had confronted lions and bears with nothing except trust in heaven's safeguarding. The difference between champion and opponent unveiled deeper realities about strength's character. Goliath depended on dimensions, power, and weaponry created by human hands. His confidence rested in quantifiable advantages that any observer could assess. David's strength originated from sources that couldn't be measured or quantified, the covenant guarantees of an invisible God. When David chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, he selected weaponry that appeared absurdly insufficient against bronze armor and iron spear tips. Still, these basic rocks bore within them the gathered strength of all existence. directed by hands that had acquired accuracy through years of safeguarding defenseless sheep from natural hunters. The sling itself signified ancient technology, deceptively basic yet devastatingly efficient in skilled hands. Shepherds had utilized such weaponry for generations, their precision developed through innumerable hours of practice in empty fields. What seemed primitive to armored warriors could deliver stones with the force of contemporary bullets. Goliath's concluding moments unveiled the weakness that lurked under his colossal exterior. The stone struck his forehead with heavenly accuracy, discovering the singular spot where his armor offered no safeguarding. His magnificent dimensions, so intimidating in life, transformed into a liability as he crashed to earth with the finality of a toppled tree. David's triumph over Goliath was not the initial encounter between Israel and the giant clans. Joshua's campaign for Canaan had demanded systematic warfare against the Enochim, those towering descendants of the Nephilim who had withstood the flood. Hebron, Debir, and Anab had been purified of their giant inhabitants through campaigns that demanded heavenly assistance. The three descendants of Enoch, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, had controlled the hill territory around Hebron with the confidence of their otherworldly ancestry. Their very designation struck dread into the hearts of ordinary humans. Only Caleb, one of the faithful scouts, held courage enough to claim that territory as his possession. His faith demonstrated stronger than their giant dimensions. Og of Bashan signified another branch of the giants following the flood. His kingdom extended across the fertile territories east of Jordan, his iron bed measuring 13.5 feet in length. The proportions of his sleeping place communicated volumes about the physical actuality of his enormous frame. Still, even this powerful king descended before Israel's progress when heavenly favor supported their mission. The Rephaim occupied the borderlands like living recollections of the antediluvian period. Their designation bore implications of the departed, the phantoms, the vestiges of what once held terrible strength. They existed in the valley that would subsequently bear their designation, their presence a constant reminder that the flood had not entirely eliminated the Watcher's inheritance from the planet. Subsequent encounters with giants marked Israel's history like recurring nightmares. The Philistine champions who succeeded Goliath bore his hereditary ancestry in their oversized frames. Ishbi-Benob wielded a bronze spear weighing 300 shekels, while Saph and additional warriors continued the custom of giant warriors opposing Israel's God through mortal confrontation. These scriptural accounts maintain more than ancient warfare. They document humanity's continuous battle with the outcomes of universal rebellion. Each giant signified a question about heavenly fairness, a test of faith and guarantees that surpassed physical actuality. Triumph over these surviving Nephilim demonstrated that heaven's strength could overcome any earthly advantage. The giants' weaponry and armor transformed into trophies in Israel's sanctuaries, physical evidence of triumphs that appeared impossible to natural reasoning. Goliath's sword discovered its way to the sanctuary at Nob, where it anticipated to fulfill David again in his escape from Saul. These objects connected present faith to past triumphs, encouraging subsequent generations to trust past what their eyes could observe. The design created in these encounters would duplicate throughout Israel's history. Whenever the nation confronted enemies that appeared too powerful to defeat, the recollection of David and Goliath would awaken courage in faithful hearts. The shepherd boy's triumph transformed into a template for grasping how heavenly strength operates through human weakness. Still, the giant's presence in scriptural account fulfills a broader intention than simple military history. They signify the ongoing challenge that contaminated strength poses to heavenly structure. Each encounter compelled Israel to select between trust in God's guarantees or submission to apparently superior force. These selections molded the nation's character and fate. The concluding disappearance of the scriptural giants signified the conclusion of a period that had started with the Watcher's rebellion. Their bloodlines, weakened by centuries of intermarriage, ultimately faded into the general human population. Still, their inheritance continued in accounts that reminded subsequent generations of the cost paid when created beings extend past their designated limits. Apocryphal rebellions, more fallen, more mysteries. Past the recognizable designations of the initial fallen resided angels whose accounts whispered through texts concealed from common view. These subsequent rebels bore their personal burdens of understanding too hazardous for mortal intellects, their personal tales of longing that brought about damnation. The rebellion that started with the Watchers distributed like waves across heaven's hierarchy, contacting beings whose very being questioned human comprehension. Penemu had fulfilled as heaven's scribe before his descent, his hands fashioning the very letters that would subsequently become humanity's written language. His rebellion originated not from desire for mortal women, but from arrogance in his personal intellectual contributions. He believed that understanding belonged to all created beings, that wisdom ought to flow freely between heaven and planet without heavenly limitation. When Penemu came down, he brought with him the crafts of ink and parchment, the mysteries of maintaining thought in permanent form. His contribution transformed human society more significantly than weaponry or metalworking ever could. Writing permitted understanding to gather across generations, wisdom to compound interest like gold in a miserly vault. Still, with literacy arrived the capacity to document not merely truth, but falsehoods dressed in truth's appearance. False prophecies could be maintained alongside genuine visions. Deceptions could be transmitted through generations with the identical confidence as heavenly revelations. Penemu's contribution bore within it the seeds of its personal contamination. Casbiel brought varied understanding to humanity, the comprehension of sacred promises and binding ceremonies. His expertise resided in the mystical connections connecting word and actuality, the strength that transformed simple speech into universal principle. Before his descent, he had helped preserve the very connections that contained existence together. The ceremonies Casbiel instructed permitted humans to access spiritual forces past their natural reach. They acquired knowledge to confine spirits, force obedience from invisible strengths, and manipulate the invisible currents that course through all being. These practices provided mortals access to capabilities that obscured the division between human and heavenly. Ramiel had supervised the dimension of visions in heaven's administration, directing the images that arrived to sleeping intellects. His rebellion originated from fascination with the division between awareness and the void, the mysterious territory where souls contacted eternity each night. He selected to investigate those borderlands without authorization from higher authority. Through Ramiel's instruction, humans acquired knowledge to navigate the vision dimension with purpose rather than simply experiencing it passively. They discovered how to pursue visions, interpret symbols, and utilize sleep as a gateway to concealed understanding. Still, this contribution arrived with terrible risks. The dreaming intellect could encounter entities that were never intended to contact human awareness. Kokabeel controlled the movements of stars and planets before his coming down into rebellion. His understanding encompassed the immense mechanism of celestial mechanics, the invisible forces that supervise the dance of heavenly bodies. He grasped how stellar positions affected earthly occurrences, how universal rhythms molded mortal destinies. The star study Kokabeel distributed with humanity unveiled designs concealed within apparent disorder. Mortals acquired knowledge to interpret their destinies in planetary movements, to schedule significant behaviors according to stellar configurations, to grasp their location within the immense universal structure. This understanding raised human awareness but also loaded it with consciousness of forces past mortal authority. Sariel's dimension had been the dimension of pure spirit, the administration of souls in their journey connecting life and death. His rebellion originated from compassion that surpassed heavenly limits. He couldn't endure to observe human spirits, endure ignorance of their genuine character and fate. His compassion transformed into the instrument of his descent. The mysteries Sariel unveiled concerned the soul's concealed strengths, its capacity to surpass physical boundaries through will and understanding. He instructed humans to commune directly with spiritual beings, to project awareness past the body's limits, to manipulate the life force that animated all existence. These capabilities transformed mortals into apprentice deities. Turiel's expertise resided in natural forces, the strength secured within stone and stream, wind and flame. Before his descent, he had supervised the elemental energies that maintained physical existence. His rebellion surfaced from longing to distribute nature's deepest mysteries with beings he regarded worthy of such understanding. Under Turiel's direction, humans acquired knowledge to command fire without fuel, to summon wind without weather, to mold stone like clay, and guide water's flow against its natural course. They discovered the concealed designations by which all natural forces could be controlled, the secret harmonies that could remake physical actuality according to human will. These secondary rebellions generated a cascade of outcomes that spread through both heaven and planet. Each fallen angel brought unique contributions that transformed human society in ways both wonderful and terrible. Their combined effect accelerated humanity's development far past what natural evolution would have permitted. The texts that maintain these accounts frequently contradict each other in details while agreeing on fundamental themes. Varied customs designate varied angels, assign varied specialties, portray varied methods of rebellion. Still, all agree that the contamination distributed past the initial watchers, including beings whose very being had preserved universal structure. Contemporary academics dispute whether these subsequent descents signify historical occurrences or symbolic portrayals of how prohibited understanding entered human awareness. Still, the practical effects stay the identical. Capabilities that ought to have stayed in heaven's exclusive dimension became available to mortal intellects, unprepared for their responsible utilization. The books holding these mysteries were themselves concealed, their understanding regarded too hazardous for general circulation. Only initiates who had demonstrated their wisdom and restraint obtained access to the complete instructions. Still, even these precautions couldn't prevent the gradual seepage of hazardous understanding into broader human consciousness. The fallen angels' contributions continued to affect human development long following their confinement. The crafts they had instructed became foundations for whole civilizations. Their mysteries, transmitted through deliberately guarded customs, molded the thinking of philosophers, magicians, and scientists who never suspected the otherworldly origin of their understanding. The return of the days of Noah. Christ's statements bore across centuries with the significance of prophecy fulfilled and yet to be fulfilled. His caution about the concluding times resonated with recollections of humanity's initial judgment. As it existed in the days of Noah, so it would exist again when the Son of Man surfaced. The designs created before the flood would duplicate themselves, though perhaps in forms that ancient eyes could scarcely picture. Noah's generation had experienced prosperity past measure. The antediluvian world held understanding that made their lives easier, their cities more magnificent, their desires more easily fulfilled. Technology fulfilled comfort, wisdom gathered in magnificent libraries, and human achievement extended to heights that appeared to guarantee unlimited advancement. Still, under this golden exterior, contamination expanded like cancer in healthy tissue. The relationship connecting heavenly and mortal had created more than mixed giants. It generated a culture where limits signified nothing, where longing justified any behavior, where strength decided right and wrong. Natural principle bent before otherworldly interference. Still, the results delivered disorder rather than structure. Advancement transformed into retreat, concealed in appealing forms. Jesus communicated to disciples whose world already displayed signs of similar designs. Roman engineering generated marvels that competed with antediluvian achievements. Greek philosophy guaranteed wisdom that surpassed traditional boundaries. Religious syncretism blended heavenly and human in ways that mirrored the watcher's initial violation. The future would magnify these trends past recognition. Marriage in Noah's period had forfeited its sacred character, transforming into simply a social contract subject to convenience and longing. The heavenly design of one man, one woman, one covenant lifetime was abandoned in favor of arrangements that fulfilled appetite rather than intention. This breakdown weakened the very foundation of human society. The eating and drinking that characterized the pre-flood world extended past ordinary nourishment to become obsessive pursuits of pleasure. Feasts extended for days, wines fermented with understanding stolen from heaven, delicacies prepared from creatures that were never intended to fulfill human appetite. Consumption transformed into a form of worship with physical fulfillment as the only recognized deity. Commerce in Noah's era operated without moral restraints. The understanding instructed by fallen angels generated products that fulfilled human longing without consideration of long-term outcomes. Markets traded in things that ought never to have been purchased or sold. Understanding, strength, even human life itself, transformed into commodities valued only for their exchange potential. The ordinariness that Jesus emphasized demonstrated most disturbing of all. People existed their daily lives without consciousness that judgment approached like a climbing tide. They made plans for tomorrow while foundations deteriorated under today. The very ordinariness of their behaviors concealed extraordinary contamination that required extraordinary response. Cautioning voices sounded in Noah's day, but the prosperous majority rejected them as religious extremism. Noah's preaching descended on ears deafened by comfort, hearts hardened by self-fulfillment. The ark's construction transformed into a local curiosity rather than a summons to repentance. Human character preferred pleasant falsehoods to uncomfortable realities. Jesus' prophecy indicated that similar blindness would characterize the generation that observed his return. Despite clear indicators, despite mounting evidence of approaching judgment, people would pursue their routines with the identical, oblivious confidence that had characterized Noah's contemporaries. Ordinariness would conceal catastrophe until the instant when concealing became impossible. The sudden character of the conclusion would capture the unprepared entirely off guard. Just as the flood arrived without concluding caution, just as the door of the ark sealed while mockers still ridiculed outside, so the day of judgment would surface while most of humanity stayed focused on immediate concerns. Tomorrow's plans would be interrupted by eternity's requirements. Still, Jesus' caution held optimism alongside its sobering message. Noah discovered grace in the Lord's eyes, and his household received salvation through faith expressed in obedient behavior. The righteous would not be forgotten when judgment descended. Heavenly compassion would safeguard those who journeyed with God despite their generation's contamination. The correspondence connecting Noah's day and the concluding times indicated that similar otherworldly activity would characterize the concluding generation. Angels or beings masquerading as angels would once again interfere in human matters. Understanding that ought to stay concealed would be unveiled to intellects unprepared for its implications. The divisions connecting heaven and planet would obscure in hazardous ways. Contemporary observers indicate developments that appear to mirror these ancient designs. Genetic engineering guarantees to reshape human character itself. Artificial intelligence threatens to generate beings more intelligent than their creators. Communication technology enables global coordination that could facilitate either unprecedented good or unparalleled evil. The implements exist for another antediluvian instant. Still, the comparison operates both ways. If the concluding times will reflect Noah's day, then those who heed the caution can prepare like Noah did. Faith expressing itself through practical obedience can construct vessels of safety in whatever form heavenly direction offers. The righteous need not dread judgment that was never intended for them. The days of Noah fulfill as both caution and comfort, warning for those who select contamination, comfort for those who select righteousness. History's designs unveil heavenly consistency. Still, within those designs reside opportunities for varied selections, varied outcomes. The flood annihilated the ancient world but maintained the foundation for fresh beginnings. Christ's reference to Noah created a framework for grasping both past and future. The identical God who judged the antediluvian world would judge the concluding generation. The identical compassion that rescued Noah's household would safeguard those who trusted heavenly guarantees above human wisdom. As it existed, so it would exist, both in judgment and in salvation. The bloodlines and secret societies. Far under the exterior of documented history resides a whisper that refuses to disappear. Royal households across Europe trace their lineage through deliberately guarded records, each generation marking bloodlines that extend back past recollection. These ancient genealogies bear significance past simple ancestry. They communicate of heavenly right, of blood that courses differently through selected vessels. The idea surfaces not from contemporary conspiracy, but from ancient belief systems that viewed certain bloodlines as contacted by otherworldly effect. Medieval courts grasped kingship as more than political strength. Rulers claimed descent from gods, from angels, from beings who once journeyed between heaven and planet. This wasn't simple propaganda. The very foundations of governance across civilizations are shaped by these beliefs. As we look at the ruling houses from ancient times, certain patterns start to emerge. The pharaohs of Egypt proclaimed themselves to be the offspring of divine beings. The emperors of Rome laid claim to godly lineage. The monarchs of Europe maintained they were appointed by divine will. Every culture kept strict controls over bloodline purity, treating marriage outside specific circles as defilement instead of partnership. Among history's most fascinating examples stands the Merovingian dynasty of France. Their historical records tell of a bloodline with supernatural beginnings, one that carried both divine favor and a terrible burden. Documents from the royal court detail uncommon characteristics among members of this family. Extraordinary stature, peculiar powers, arcane knowledge that appeared without any formal instruction. These weren't random observations, but recurring traits recorded generation after generation. Organizations operating in secrecy arose to protect and direct these bloodlines. The Knights Templar, looking beyond their stated mission, safeguarded ancient wisdom concerning lineages and their deeper meaning. Their abrupt destruction and the persecution that followed points to them holding information that posed a danger to the established powers of church and state. Papers unearthed centuries afterward suggest they kept genealogical maps linking ruling families to entities mentioned in forbidden scriptures. Freemasonry constructed intricate frameworks centered on the idea of ancient knowledge carried through specific bloodlines. Their ranking systems and ceremonial practices reference master architects, wisdom handed down from Solomon's sacred temple, mysteries capable of altering one's fundamental comprehension of humanity. The symbols consistently point toward beings who shared prohibited arts with early mankind. Contemporary genetic science brings fresh perspectives to these age-old beliefs. Researchers today acknowledge that human DNA holds traces of ancient intermingling, proof of genetic information that doesn't align with conventional evolutionary frameworks. Though scientists continue debating what this means, the evidence leaves room for the idea that human lineages were affected by genetic material from non-human sources in prehistoric times. When seen through this understanding, the safeguarding of particular bloodlines takes on different significance. Instead of mere snobbery, bloodline preservation might actually be efforts to protect genetic inheritance that carries particular traits or capabilities. The royal family's fixation on ancestry records shifts from simple pride into intentional genetic conservation efforts reaching across thousands of years. Elite families in the modern era carry on these same practices. Marriages within certain circles remain the norm, producing genetic separation that keeps distinctive features intact. Wealth and authority move along family paths that can be traced back through recorded genealogies to ancient ruling dynasties. The power these families exercise reaches far beyond what their numbers would suggest. Banking families such as the Rothschilds keep meticulous family records, linking them to European nobility. Industrial titans chart their ancestry through carefully maintained documents. Political dynasties transfer authority through blood relation rather than capability alone. These recurring patterns point to methodical preservation of genetic legacy that holds importance beyond mere social standing. This raises the question, what precisely are these bloodlines working to preserve? Ancient writings portrayed the Nephilim as creatures of remarkable height, intellect, and capability. They governed as monarchs and shared sophisticated knowledge with early societies. If fragments of their genetic legacy endured, keeping those bloodlines intact would be a sound strategy for sustaining power and control across the ages. Secret organizations function as protectors of this understanding, forming networks that reach across continents and centuries. They offer stability when governments collapse, protecting bloodlines and their connected secrets through times of turmoil. Their ceremonies and imagery keep ties to ancient wisdom while hiding its actual character from those on the outside, the Watchers and the resurgence of the occult. The Renaissance delivered more than an artistic awakening. Concealed within its cultural shift, ancient wisdom started surfacing from closely protected libraries and hidden collections. Scholars recovered writings that had been concealed for hundreds of years, manuscripts discussing angels who abandoned grace and shared forbidden understanding with humanity. Alchemy surfaced as one of the initial fields to publicly investigate these ancient lessons. Practitioners such as John Dee claimed they were in direct contact with angelic entities, obtaining elaborate magical frameworks through divination sessions that continued for years. Enochian magic, specifically pulled from the Book of Enoch, developing complex ceremonies meant to reach the same beings described in old writings. The understanding these alchemists chased went well past simple transmutation of metals. They pursued the transformation of human awareness, techniques to prolong life, methods to send messages across enormous distances. These objectives mirror precisely what ancient sources say the Watchers taught, working with metals, beautification, prophecy, and skills that pushed human ability past natural boundaries. Kabbalah built refined frameworks for grasping the connection between the divine and physical worlds. Its tree of life charts the movement of consciousness from pure spirit down into material form, outlining exactly how angels might take physical shape. The framework offers hands-on techniques for turning this process around, for climbing through spiritual dimensions toward unmediated divine encounter. Medieval spellbooks like the Lesser Key of Solomon list precise directions for calling forth and controlling fallen angels. These volumes weren't just theoretical. They gave specific names, symbols, and ritual steps practiced by those across Europe. The similarities among different spellbooks indicate they pulled from shared roots, ancient customs kept alive through secret channels. The Rosicrucians appeared in the early 1600s, asserting they held ancient wisdom given by enigmatic teachers. Their declaration told of a coming transformation for humanity, of secrets that would transform comprehension of natural principles. They presented themselves as keepers of knowledge, stretching back through Christian mystics to humanity's earliest civilizations. Freemasonry wove many of these ideas into its ranking structure. The craft discusses master builders who held advanced building knowledge, temples built using concepts that contemporary engineering finds challenging to grasp. The link to Solomon's temple connects straight to biblical stories of divine beings sharing advanced understanding with chosen humans. As the 18th and 19th centuries progressed, mystical groups were multiplying throughout Europe and America. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn assembled thorough magical frameworks that blended Kabbalah, alchemy, and angelic magic into hands-on training courses. Those who joined included well-known writers, scientists, and politicians who viewed occult investigation as respectable intellectual work. These groups held that fallen angels hadn't just vanished following their ancient punishment. Rather, they stayed reachable through correct ritual methods, still offering advanced understanding to deserving seekers. The cost stayed the same, stepping over lines that divine law had drawn, embracing knowledge that brought built-in corruption. Contemporary occultism carries forward these customs through groups like the Ordo Templi Orientis and the Church of Satan. These organizations openly praise the Luciferian approach, interpreting the original uprising as humanity's freedom from divine oppression. They see themselves as successors to Prometheus, taking fire from the gods for human advancement. The attraction of these teachings reaches past simple defiance. Those who practice report actual outcomes from their efforts. Strengthened psychic capacities, worldly success, entry to hidden understanding that turns out accurate. These results point to whatever intelligence exists behind occult frameworks, still delivering genuine advantages to those prepared to work with it. Modern chaos magic adopts a more hands-on stance, handling ancient spirits and current psychological methods as equally useful instruments for altering consciousness. Those who practice engage with entities outlined in ancient spellbooks right alongside ideas from quantum physics and brain science, looking for workable approaches to expanding human capacity. The Internet era has made occult knowledge available to everyone, knowledge that was previously limited to secret groups. Ancient spellbooks can now be found freely on the Internet. Ritual methods that demanded initiation into exclusive circles can be picked up through online video lessons. This open access has sparked a worldwide renewed fascination with angelic magic and reaching out to fallen angels. This revival brings up significant questions regarding the character of these ancient beings and their ongoing effect on human progress. If the Watchers were merely mythological creations, the steady results practitioners report across the centuries would be hard to account for. The other possibility indicates these entities stay active, still sharing forbidden understanding with those ready to pursue it. The UFO connection, visitors from space or messengers from above. The contemporary UFO occurrence started with Kenneth Arnold's 1947 sighting close to Mount Rainier. Yet the beings he outlined weren't completely unknown. Ancient stories of divine messengers coming in blazing chariots, sky gods coming down to meet with humans, hold striking resemblances to modern alien encounter descriptions. Ancient and current reports both detail beings of remarkable intelligence who come from the skies. They show sophisticated technology that appears magical to human witnesses. They express curiosity about human genetics and breeding. They share knowledge that moves human civilization forward while cautioning about approaching judgments. Most notably, they show up at pivotal points in human history, providing direction that influences how civilization develops. The physical portrayals line up with remarkable regularity. Ancient writings outline the Watchers as tall, glowing beings with large eyes and advanced understanding. Contemporary abductees describe similar physical traits in their alien encounters. Both categories show capabilities that go beyond ordinary physical restrictions: mind-to-mind communication, immediate travel, control of time and space. Dr. Jacques Vallée, among the most well-regarded UFO investigators, contends that the occurrence represents the same intelligence that showed up in previous centuries as angels, demons, or fairy people. The appearance shifts to fit cultural expectations, yet the core reality stays the same. This would account for why encounters have common features across various time periods and cultures. The genetic element offers another remarkable similarity. Ancient sources detail fallen angels mating with human women, producing hybrid children with uncommon traits. Contemporary abduction stories often include reproductive operations, genetic collection, and the production of human-alien hybrid offspring. Both situations point to continuing genetic testing by non-human intelligences. Location trends also reveal notable consistency. Mount Hermon, where ancient writings position the Watchers' arrival, lies in an area famous for regular UFO sightings. Other sites connected with ancient divine meetings, such as Mount Sinai and Mount Ararat, keep producing strange aerial occurrences. This points to either cultural memory shaping what people see, or actual links between ancient and current contact locations. The knowledge-sharing dimension stays especially fascinating. Ancient stories outline fallen angels instructing advanced metalwork, star study, and combat to early humans. Contemporary contactees frequently describe getting scientific data, technological understanding, or prophetic alerts about humanity's coming days. Both forms of contact lead to quick advancement of human knowledge and ability. How governments handle UFO occurrences reflects how historical religious powers reacted to angelic meetings. Both include secrecy, rejection, and attempts to manage public awareness of the contact. This points to awareness that broad acceptance of non-human intelligence might shake up existing power arrangements, just as ancient divine meetings tested established religious and political structures. The interdimensional theory provides another link between ancient and current stories. Instead of crossing space, these beings might live in dimensions that sometimes cross paths with our physical world. This would account for their capacity to show up and vanish, to work with physical matter while staying essentially non-physical. Ancient sources outline the Watchers as living in a space between heaven and earth, neither completely divine nor entirely material. Contemporary physics acknowledges multiple dimensions past our usual three-dimensional reality. If these beings occupy these parallel dimensions, they could meet with humanity across various time periods without needing physical movement between stars. The prophetic element offers another similarity deserving attention. Ancient divine messengers frequently delivered alerts about approaching disasters, direction for making it through, and forecasts about humanity's coming progress. Contemporary UFO encounters often include environmental alerts, forecasts about technological advancement, and direction for species survival during nearing planetary shifts. The consciousness growth dimension stays consistent across both occurrences. Ancient sources outline humans who met divine beings as gaining improved perception, prophetic powers, and grasp of cosmic laws. Contemporary contactees frequently describe broadened consciousness, psychic powers, and profound comprehension of universal laws following their meetings. Some investigators propose that the UFO occurrence represents the coming back of the Watchers, completing ancient forecasts about their final freedom from confinement. The rise in sightings from 1947 onward might show preparation for more direct action in human matters, comparable to their ancient participation in human progress. The technology dimension offers captivating links between ancient and current stories. Ancient sources detail divine beings operating vehicles that move without apparent propulsion, create illumination, and cross huge distances immediately. Contemporary UFO descriptions outline the same features in alien craft. This points to either cultural shaping of what people see or actual consistency in non-human technology, transhumanism, and prohibited understanding. Currently, Silicon Valley shows itself as the height of human creativity. Yet underneath its shining surfaces rests something ancient awakening. The same drive that pushed the Watchers to share forbidden understanding with early humanity now shows itself through computer code, genetic patterns, and artificial networks that offer to go beyond human restrictions. CRISPR gene modification technology permits exact alteration of human DNA, creating options that previously lived only in ancient myths regarding divine human crossbreeds. Researchers can now add genetic information from different species into human cells, producing chimeric lifeforms that make the lines between various kinds of life unclear. The moral questions around these powers mirror cautions discovered in sources outlining the first genetic corruptions that brought divine punishment. Artificial intelligence creation follows trends strikingly close to ancient stories of forbidden knowledge sharing. Small researcher teams operate in secretive settings, creating powers that might transform human civilization. They confess they don't completely grasp the frameworks they're building, recognizing that sophisticated AI could form objectives and approaches past human understanding or management. The chase for eternal life powers much of today's biotechnology investigation. Businesses such as Alphabet's Calico and Altos Labs invest billions into grasping aging mechanisms, looking for methods to prolong human lifespan without limit. This reflects exactly what ancient sources outline the Watchers providing: understanding that would render humans like gods, going past the natural restrictions set on mortal life. Neuralink and comparable brain-computer connection projects seek to blend human consciousness with artificial intelligence. Elon Musk directly characterizes this as vital for human continuation in a reality where AI powers surpass biological intelligence. The technology offers improved memory, immediate entry to worldwide information systems, and straight mind-to-mind contact, powers that ancient sources credit to angelic beings. Genetic improvement investigation centers on producing humans with better physical and mental powers. Researchers pinpoint genes linked with remarkable intelligence, power, and extended life, creating approaches to build these characteristics into coming generations. The objective of producing superhuman children mirrors ancient stories of Nephilim giants who held powers well past ordinary human restrictions. The wording employed by transhumanist supporters frequently mirrors the enticements outlined in ancient stories. They offer freedom from human restrictions, going past mortality, development into higher states of consciousness. These are exactly the proposals that resulted in humanity's first corruption and the devastating punishment that came after. Technology leaders, such as Ray Kurzweil, forecast an approaching singularity where human and artificial intelligence blend into something never seen before. They characterize this shift as unavoidable development, yet recognize doubt about what comes out of the process. Ancient sources outline comparable transformative happenings that fundamentally changed human character and triggered divine action. Biotechnology businesses work on producing fresh kinds of life that never lived naturally. Synthetic biology permits building of living things from nothing using genetic code as instructions that can be programmed for biological systems. This power to produce life forms mirrors ancient portrayals of forbidden understanding that permitted working with natural creation directly. How fast technology develops reflects ancient stories of quick civilization progress following divine knowledge sharing. Within a few decades, Humanity has created powers that earlier generations would have thought miraculous. This quickening points to influence past normal human finding patterns, maybe showing continuation of ancient knowledge-sharing methods. Classified investigation projects inside government and business locations investigate technologies that stay hidden for national security purposes. The secrecy around these projects mirrors ancient outlines of concealed understanding that only chosen people were allowed to reach. The division makes certain that even investigators don't grasp the complete effects of their work. Quantum computing creation offers to address problems past regular computer powers, possibly revealing secrets of consciousness, reality, and dimensional control that present science can't touch. The investigators developing these frameworks recognize they're nearing basic mysteries regarding reality's actual character. Gene drive technology might change whole species across worldwide populations through genetic changes that move automatically through breeding. This power to transform life on a planetary level mirrors ancient stories of corruptions that touched all living beings, demanding divine action to stop permanent damage of natural creation. The moral structures created to direct these technologies frequently clearly dismiss conventional moral limits as old-fashioned barriers to human advancement. Transhumanist thinking positions itself as development past traditional religious and moral boundaries, taking on the same view that ancient sources outline as bringing divine punishment. Present-day advances in human improvement, artificial intelligence, and genetic control represent either humanity's best chance for going beyond or repeating ancient errors that brought devastating results. The understanding being chased holds the same offers and threats that ancient sources caution about. What stays unclear is whether current humanity will show greater wisdom in managing forbidden understanding than earlier civilizations that encountered comparable enticements. The battle in heaven already happened or still to come. The Book of Revelation discusses a battle in heaven that throws Satan and his angels down to earth, yet the timing stays oddly unclear. Ancient sources outline this fight as an event from the past, whereas prophetic writings handle it as something coming in the future. This time, confusion points to something more intricate than straightforward time sequence, maybe an endless fight that shows up across various time periods. Milton's Paradise Lost made well known the picture of Lucifer's uprising as an event before history happening prior to human formation. This reading positions the fall of angels in mythic time separated from human history. Yet earlier sources indicate different options. The Book of Enoch outlines the Watcher's arrival during human civilization, suggesting that angelic uprising happened inside historical time instead of prior to it. How Lucifer's uprising and the Watcher's arrival connect stays uncertain in ancient sources. Certain sources handle them as different happenings, including separate angel groups. Others indicate they show various dimensions of the same spiritual fight. The uncertainty could be purposeful, showing the challenge of outlining eternal truths using time-based wording. Revelation's forecast regarding the dragon being restrained for 1,000 years, followed by freedom for a last fight, suggests repeating cycles instead of straight-line movement. This indicates that spiritual combat works based on designs that happen again across various ages. Every cycle includes times of limitation followed by heightened action, constructing toward final resolution. The present rise in spiritual occurrences, UFO meetings, occult comeback, technological advancement that mirrors ancient, forbidden understanding could show the nearing of another significant cycle in this continuing fight. Ancient sources outline comparable times of heightened non-human action coming before major civilization shifts. Gnostic sources show the battle in heaven as continuing fight between powers trying to keep human spiritual blindness and those providing freedom through understanding. From this view, every age witnesses fresh fighting between consciousness-limiting and consciousness-growing powers. The appearances shift, yet the core dynamic stays the same. The technological transformation of the last few decades has produced powers that ancient sources connect with divine beings. Worldwide contact, watching of whole populations, control of genetic patterns, artificial production of thinking entities. These advances might show preparation for more straightforward spiritual fighting, providing various groups with instruments needed for cosmic-level combat. Biblical forecasts outline the last fight in language that mixes spiritual and physical features. Countries come together for combat, yet the fighting includes more than regular military powers. Angels and demons join in straight away. Supernatural occurrences go with earthly happenings, and the result settles the spiritual fate of human civilization. What hybrid beings do in this coming fight stays important, yet mysterious. Revelation references the coming back of Nephilim-like giants during the final days. These beings seemingly work as representatives for spiritual powers, trying to gain control over Earth. Their genetic background provides them powers that regular humans don't have, rendering them helpful resources in spiritual combat. Contemporary military creation progressively centers on improving human soldiers through technological and biological approaches. Super soldier efforts try to produce warriors with powers past natural human boundaries. This investigation mirrors ancient stories of angelic beings producing improved humans for employment in their fights with divine power. When these prophetic happenings will occur stays purposefully vague. Jesus cautioned that nobody knows the day or hour, and ancient sources repeatedly highlight the unexpected character of spiritual actions in human matters. This doubt could be intentional, stopping human preparation that might interfere with divine arrangements. Certain readings indicate that the battle in heaven shows an internal human fight instead of actual angelic fighting. The uprising happens inside human consciousness as people pick between spiritual paths that bring toward divine link or distance. This psychological reading doesn't reduce the fight's reality, yet moves its main battleground inside human life. How this cosmic fight ends appears settled in advance in prophetic writings, with divine power finally winning over rebellious powers. Still, the method includes actual struggle with unclear middle results. Human picks during the fight shape both how long it lasts and its effect on separate souls. Ancient sources indicate that grasping the character of this spiritual combat gives humans better capacity to handle its tests. Understanding the fight's actual size permits people to spot spiritual effects that could otherwise stay concealed. This awareness turns especially vital as the fight grows stronger and spiritual powers turn more active in human matters. The battle in heaven keeps going across past, present, and coming days because it shows an eternal principle instead of a short-term historical happening. Every generation encounters the same basic pick between uprising and following, between looking for forbidden understanding or accepting divine boundaries. The appearances shift, yet the spiritual dynamic stays the same across all ages. Apocalyptic forecast, the Last Judgment. The final days come not through quick disaster, yet through slow revealing of truths that have existed all along underneath ordinary life's surface. Ancient forecasts outline this showing as apocalypse, actually meaning revealing instead of destruction. What comes out from past the curtain are spiritual powers that have been shaping human matters from the start. Revelation's pictures of seals opening and horns sounding show the orderly taking away of walls that have kept supernatural truths concealed from human awareness. Every seal opened shows another part of the cosmic fight that has been going on unseen. The horn sounds declare the growing straightforwardness of spiritual action in earthly matters. The beast rising from the ocean holds features of ancient kingdoms, yet holds authority past any historical empire. Its power reaches over technology, genetics, consciousness, and spiritual dimensions all at once. This indicates the last earthly kingdom will use both material and supernatural powers, mixing human structure with non-human intelligence and authority. The beast's mark shows more than basic economic management. Ancient sources link such markings with genetic change, spiritual loyalty, and consciousness change. People who get the mark turn basically different from unchanged humans, producing a species split that can't be turned around through regular approaches. Present advances in biotechnology, neural connection frameworks, and genetic change offer ways through which such basic human change might happen. How voluntary these changes are reflects prophetic outlines of people picking to get the mark instead of being made to follow. Bound angels getting freed during the tribulation time indicates spiritual beings currently held will get back freedom to meet straight with human matters. Ancient sources outline particular angels restrained until set times when they'll be allowed to finish their first missions. This freedom changes earthly fights into straight spiritual combat. The two witnesses outlined in Revelation hold powers that mirror ancient portrayals of Enoch and other remarkable humans who obtained supernatural powers through divine link. Their authority to bring down fire from heaven, halt rain, and change water to blood shows the bringing back of spiritual power that lived in previous ages prior to human consciousness, turning restricted to just material awareness. The Great Tribulation includes more than political trouble or natural catastrophes. It shows a time when reality's spiritual dimensions turn visible to regular human awareness. This revealing makes every person recognize spiritual truths they earlier dismissed, producing crisis for people whose worldviews can't handle supernatural reality. Countries gathering for the last fight of Armageddon happens not through regular military partnerships, yet through spiritual effects that force world leaders toward a set-in-advance fight. Ancient sources outline how spiritual beings work with human governments to complete goals that go past earthly political aims. Christ coming back shows divine action when human picks have brought situations demanding supernatural fixing. The timing relies partly on human behaviors hitting particular levels that set off prophetic completion. This indicates human conduct shapes the timetable of divine action, instead of going by predetermined schedules. Judgment of the watchers and their human partners happens during this time of revealing. Ancient sources outline how the held angels encounter final sentencing, whereas humans who sided with their plan face results for joining in uprising against divine structure. The judgment reaches past separate souls to cover whole civilizations that took on forbidden understanding. The fresh heaven and fresh earth that come out following the last judgment show more than bringing back first settings. They build in lessons gained through the whole cosmic fight, producing a reality that holds the advantages of broadened consciousness without the corruption that went with forbidden understanding gaining. What changed humans do in this fresh reality indicates the cosmic fight finally works to create spiritual maturity that couldn't be reached through innocence by itself. The practice of picking between uprising and following, though expensive, creates beings able to keep advanced consciousness without falling into the corruption that wrecked earlier civilizations. The endless punishment outlined for rebellious angels and humans doesn't show random divine harshness, yet natural results of picks that divide consciousness from its divine source. The judgment shows results that were built into the picks made during the time of testing, showing fairness instead of placing random penalties. Ancient forecast repeatedly stresses these coming happenings, complete designs set up at human history's start. The Last Judgment shows the finishing of spiritual laws that have been operating through all earlier ages. Grasping these designs offers context for spotting the nearing of prophetic completion in present-day advances, concealed in full view, popular culture, and the watchers. Hollywood's interest in fallen angels reaches well past basic entertainment worth. Large studios put hundreds of millions of dollars into projects that steadily come back to ideas of divine uprising, human-angel crossbreeds, and cosmic combat between supernatural groups. How these stories keep appearing points to something stronger than market-pushed content production. The Transformers series shows mechanical beings from another world who have been quietly shaping human technological advancement for thousands of years. These entities split into competing groups, some trying to assist humanity develop, others working to control or wipe out human civilization. The basic idea mirrors ancient stories of watchers who shared forbidden understanding while chasing conflicting plans concerning human fate. Marvel's film universe constructs its main mythology around beings from different dimensions who hold godlike authority and have been honored by human civilizations all through history. The Asgardians, Eternals, and different cosmic entities fit portrayals discovered in ancient sources regarding divine beings who governed over early human groups prior to vanishing from straight contact. The X-Men series investigates genetic changes that provide certain humans' powers well past ordinary boundaries. These mutants encounter persecution from regular humans who dread their authority, whereas struggling with questions regarding whether they show development or abomination. The similarity to ancient stories of Nephilim giants who held superhuman powers yet created dread and fighting offers the emotional center for the whole series. Television shows like Supernatural and Constantine show current settings where ancient spiritual entities keep working through human representatives, secret groups, and supernatural structures. These programs handle biblical and forbidden stories as actual history, indicating the fights outlined in ancient sources stay active in present times. Video games progressively include main characters who are human-angel crossbreeds with particular powers that permit them to battle supernatural enemies. Games such as Darksiders and Dante's Inferno pull straight from biblical and forbidden sources, giving players hands-on experiences rooted in ancient stories of cosmic combat. How well-liked vampire and werewolf stories are in books and movies frequently builds in ideas of ancient bloodlines, genetic corruption, and superhuman powers moved through generations. These tales often follow their starts to basic happenings that changed human character, producing beings who live between human and divine groups. Anime and manga from Japan show these ideas go past Western culture. Series such as Neon Genesis, Evangelion, and Hellsing build in Christian apocalyptic pictures, whereas investigating questions regarding human development, consciousness shift, and meeting with supernatural intelligences. How popular these stories are worldwide indicates universal human interest in these ancient ideas. Children's shows progressively bring in these ideas through fantasy settings that render them reachable to young watchers. Movies such as How to Train Your Dragon and shows like Avatar show ideas of humans forming bonds with non-human intelligences, obtaining improved powers through these connections, and encountering fights that settle the coming days of both species. Music business symbolism steadily uses fallen angel pictures, with performers taking on characters that praise uprising against divine power. How common Illuminati and occult symbolism is in well-liked music videos indicates either purposeful messaging or unconscious cultural showing of these ancient ideas. Social media sites strengthen conspiracy ideas that link ancient sources to present happenings, producing grassroots groups centered on figuring out concealed messages in popular culture. These groups frequently show refined grasp of ancient sources, whereas using their understanding to present entertainment material. When these cultural works come out, frequently lines up with times of heightened curiosity about UFO occurrences, occult methods, and conspiracy ideas regarding secret groups. This timing indicates either planned messaging or collective unconscious showing of archetypal ideas that turn more noticeable during particular historical times. Academic study of popular culture progressively spots these designs as more than chance. Researchers observe that entertainment media works as a main way through which current societies handle questions regarding human character, technological advancement, and meeting with non-human intelligences. How interactive present-day media permits watchers to join in these stories, instead of just taking them in without action. Role-playing games, virtual reality activities, and augmented reality permit users to feel being improved humans, meeting with supernatural entities, and joining in cosmic fights. This hands-on dimension brings psychological effect that wasn't achievable with earlier entertainment types. The question comes up whether these cultural works show preparation for showing of concealed truths or just working with archetypal human interests. How refined the material is, and its regularity across various production businesses and national cultures, indicates planning that reaches past market-pushed choosing. The total result of this cultural flooding is a population that has been widely shown ideas regarding non-human intelligence, genetic improvement, consciousness growth, and supernatural fighting. When ancient stories are shown as actual history instead of mythology, watchers possess ready mental structures for grasping these options through their entertainment experiences. Prohibited archaeology, giants, skeletons, and hiding the truth. Newspaper collections from the 1800s and early 1900s hold thousands of descriptions outlining giant human skeletons found across North America. How regular these stories are, published in mainstream newspapers across various areas and time spans, indicates an actual archaeological occurrence that has afterward been methodically hidden from public understanding. The Smithsonian Institution gets particular focus in these historical stories. Local newspapers often reference Smithsonian workers coming to gather strange skeletal remains, offering scientific investigation and keeping. Still, these specimens seldom show up in later scientific publications, and the institution's present position rejects holding any giant human remains. Descriptions outline skeletons going from 7 to 12 feet in height, frequently discovered in burial hills built with refined engineering methods. Many stories reference strange skull shapes, additional tooth rows, and bone thickness notably greater than current humans. Some descriptions outline objects buried with the remains that show advanced metalwork and skill. Where these findings were made covers from the Great Lakes area through the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, reaching into the southeastern United States. This design lines up with places where Native American oral customs discuss ancient giant races that occupied the land prior to present tribal populations coming. Cherokee, Choctaw, and different tribal customs steadily outline fights with giant humanoid beings who held advanced understanding and technology. These oral histories handle the giants as historical truth instead of mythological ideas, outlining particular battles, places, and results that led to the giants' final defeat or leaving from tribal lands. European explorer stories from the colonial time support native customs regarding giant human remains. Spanish conquistadors, French missionaries, and English settlers recorded findings of remarkably large human bones and burial locations, all through their territorial growth. These early stories come prior to current archaeological institutions and their standardized methods for handling strange findings. Professional archaeology developing happened alongside reduced reporting of giant skeleton findings. Academic institutions set up methods for managing strange discoveries that stressed fitting with common ideas regarding human development and movement designs. Findings that went against accepted timelines or population frameworks got less focus or were read differently to match existing structures. Museums worldwide reportedly house groups of strange skeletal remains in storage spaces not reachable for public viewing. Past museum workers sometimes describe witnessing specimens that notably surpass ordinary human sizes, yet official rules stop public entry to these materials. The difference between historical openness regarding giant findings and present institutional secrecy indicates purposeful information control. Latest advances in independent archaeology have brought fresh findings of strange human remains. Locations in Peru, Romania, and different places have produced skeletons that surpass ordinary human sizes, whereas showing features that don't match standard developmental frameworks. These findings frequently encounter official doubt or get declared false without complete scientific checking. DNA study of ancient remains sometimes creates outcomes that don't fit expected human genetic designs. Certain specimens reveal genetic indicators that point to mixing with unknown human populations or likely non-human genetic information. These outcomes frequently stay unpublished or get read differently to match accepted frameworks of human genetic variety. Hiding information regarding giant human remains works for multiple institutional interests. Religious groups might view such proof as going against set theological positions. Academic institutions might push back against information that tests basic ideas regarding human development and ancient civilizations. Government groups might think about the social effects of confirming ancient stories regarding non-human genetic shaping of human populations. Alternative investigators contend that methodical hiding of giant skeleton proof shows attempts to hide evidence that biblical and forbidden stories of Nephilim giants were historically correct instead of mythological. If confirmed, such proof would support ancient sources regarding non-human genetic working with early human populations and the living of hybrid children with superhuman features. The digital age has produced fresh options for keeping and spreading proof regarding strange archaeological findings. Social media sites, independent websites, and digital collections keep groups of historical newspaper stories, photographs, and testimonies that record the giant skeleton occurrence. This spread-out keeping renders hiding more challenging than during earlier times when information management relied on institutional gatekeepers. Present-day building and digging projects sometimes reveal strange human remains that fit historical outlines of giant skeletons. Still, current methods demand immediate reporting to official powers who typically take the specimens from public entry. The uncommon cases where such findings get media focus frequently lead to official accounts that reduce their importance or question whether they're real. The technological powers now reachable for genetic study, radiocarbon dating, and shape investigation might conclusively settle questions regarding ancient giant populations. Still, reaching the needed specimens stays challenging because of institutional rules that limit investigation on potentially controversial materials. This produces a situation where final proof could live, yet stays scientifically unreachable. The buildup of historical stories, native customs, early explorer descriptions, and present-day findings indicates giant human populations lived in ancient times and left physical proof of their being there. How modern institutions methodically obscure this proof brings up questions regarding institutional motivations and the likely social effects of confirming ancient stories regarding human and non-human genetic mixing. The lesson of the story: power, corruption, and results. The ancient story of the Watchers shows designs that happen again all through human history with troubling regularity. Every generation encounters the same basic pick between accepting natural boundaries or chasing understanding that offers to go past human restrictions. The attraction stays the same across cultures and centuries: the proposal of turning like gods through secret wisdom that raises consciousness past regular experience. Power corrupts not because power directly is bad, yet because chasing power frequently demands stepping over moral lines that live there for protective purposes. The Watchers hold legitimate power inside their first roles, yet their wish for broader control brought them to break the natural structure that kept cosmic stability. Their uprising shows how even beings with divine character can fall when they put personal ambition over universal balance. Understanding provided by fallen beings consistently holds concealed prices that aren't clear until following the exchange is finished. Ancient sources outline the Watchers instructing metalwork, star study, and different arts that moved human civilization forward, whereas at the same time bringing in combat, pride, and spiritual corruption. Current similarities can be discovered in technologies that offer actual advantages, whereas producing unexpected results that endanger human welfare and freedom. What makes forbidden understanding attractive rests in its partial truth. The Watchers didn't provide complete lies, yet instead advanced information that was correct yet wrong for human progress at that point. When and how understanding gets received matters equally as the material directly. Getting information prior to creating the wisdom to manage it responsibly produces chances for devastating wrong use. Human character holds built-in weakness to offers of going beyond that skip natural growth methods. Wanting to turn more than human through outside approaches instead of inside development produces susceptibility to misleading proposals that seem to offer shortcuts to enlightenment. This design accounts for why comparable enticements work across various cultures.